On ouvre les portes, s'il vous plaît.
Projet de loi émanant du gouvernement commune.
Government Bills Commons. Report stage of Bill C-15, an act to implement certain provisions of the budget.
Standing on the notice paper for the report stage of Bill C-15, motions number 1 to 9 will be grouped for debate and voted upon according to the voting pattern available at the table. Je vais maintenant soumettre les motions.
I shall now propose motions numbered 1 to 9 to the House.
Monsieur Caron, appuyé par Monsieur
Caron, seconded by Ms. Ramsey, moves that Bill C-15 be amended by deleting Section 9. Mr. Caron, seconded by Ms. Ramsey, moves that Bill C-15 be amended by deleting Section 26.
Motion numéro 3.
Motion number 3. Mr. Caron, seconded by Ms. Ramsey, moves that Bill C-15 be amended by deleting Clause 34.
Minister, motion number 4. Mr. Morneau for Ms. Mahajcik, seconded by Ms. Bibeau, moves that Bill C-15 in Clause 212 be amended by adding after the paragraph 12 2.8c that it enacts the following. C1, the region of southern interior British Columbia described in subsection 7.1 of the schedule. B, adding after the paragraph 12 2.8e that it enacts the following. E1, the region of southern Saskatchewan described in subsection 9.3 of that schedule. C, adding after the paragraph 12 2.8g that it enacts the following. The region of Edmonton described in G1, the region of Edmonton described in subsection 10.2 of that schedule. Motion numéro 5.
Motion number 5, Mr. Caron, seconded by Ms. Ramsey, moves that Bill C-15 be amended by deleting Clause 233.
Motion
number 6. Mr. Caron, seconded by Ms. Ramsey, moves that Bill C-15 be amended by deleting Clause 234. Motion number 7. Mr. Caron, seconded by Ms. Ramsey, moves that Bill C-15 be amended by deleting Clause 235.
Motion numéro 8.
Motion number 8. Mr. Caron, seconded by Ms. Ramsey, moves that Bill C-15 be amended by deleting Clause 236.
And motion
number 9, Mr. Caron, seconded by Ms. Ramsey, moves that Bill C-15 be amended by deleting Clause 237.
Okay, débat. L'honorable
Debate. The Honourable Member for Rimouski, Neigette-Témiscouata-les-Basques. Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I'm very pleased to rise in the House to discuss C-15 at report stage. As you know, I sat on the Finance Committee where the bill was examined, and unfortunately I must announce that history is repeating itself. I sat on the Finance Committee for 3 years in the last Parliament, and to my knowledge, in 6 different budget implementation bills, only one amendment out of thousands of pages was ever passed by the committee, and in order for that amendment to be passed, it required a sub-amendment by the government in place at the time. And in this case, we were told that this government was going to be more collaborative, more open with the opposition. But once again, Mr. Speaker, even though our amendments were very reasonable and sought to correct certain deficiencies in the bill, none were accepted. In fact, In the 3 or 4 meetings that we had with witnesses, the committee heard very interesting things about the content, but also certain deficiencies in the bill. And unfortunately, even though we drew the government's attention to these flaws, they decided not to remedy them. The only amendment that was adopted was one from the government, from a Liberal member. Why? They simply sought to correct something they forgot in the bill. And that's another characteristic of omnibus bills. We know that on the government side, they're denying that this is an omnibus bill. It only has 179 pages. Only 35 different pieces of legislation are amended or added or corrected. However, this is undeniably an omnibus bill, and the major impact is that the committee has no opportunity to consider it in a serious way, to analyze it scrupulously. And goodness knows that there were significant things in this bill that deserved our attention. Unfortunately, that wasn't the case. In this bill, there is one deficiency that the government is trying to correct at the report stage, and that we as the opposition managed to draw their attention to. I must say that I paid attention to the Prime Minister's statement to the effect that when it comes to EI, 12 regions, an arbitrary figure, were given an extension of EI benefits. The Prime Minister announced on May 13th that 3 more regions would be added: Southern Saskatchewan, Edmonton, and the southern interior of BC. I was very surprised when we came to clause-by-clause consideration that these 3 additions were contained nowhere, and the government seemed to have forgotten that commitment. So we attempted to make a correction. Initially, we said that all regions should be eligible, including Quebec, where there are no eligible regions. That was declared out of order by the Speaker of the House. Then we tried an amendment that would mean that all regions that were eligible for the pilot project abolished by the Conservatives in 2011-2012 and that had that extension of 5 weeks in high unemployment areas, well, that was also declared out of order. So we're trying to extend a hand to the government and say, look, we're going to table amendments regarding regions you'd already announced and add those to the bill. That was declared out of order because we didn't have royal assent. But what's important is the government didn't seem to understand what we were talking about. They were completely confused. We asked the official who was there for explanation. She was very useful. However, she had no answer about whether or not the government intended to correct the problem or even knew there was a problem, given the commitments they made not during the election campaign, but 2 weeks before committee consideration. So, Mr. Speaker, a good part of the examination seemed to be improvised. A good part of the bill seems to be improvised. It contains decisions that are contrary to commitments that had been made during the election campaign by the government. And these are amendments that we're putting forward now at report stage.
In this, at the report stage, is to actually have the government respect, fulfill the commitment it made during the last campaign regarding the small and medium-sized businesses. You know, Mr. Speaker, back in 2008, the NDP actually, for the first time, brought the idea of decreasing the tax rate for small and medium-sized businesses from 11 to 9%. We did the same. We did the same in 2011, and we did the same in 2015. But the Conservative government, to their credit, there's much that we didn't support in their previous budget or their last budget, actually announced a decrease of this tax rate from 11 to 9 over a period of 4 years. So it was a commitment of the NDP that the Conservative government decided to implement, and we were really thankful. We wanted it to be sped up, basically, doing it over 2 years rather than 4, but at least the gesture was there. And it's really, really not frequent, Mr. Speaker, that all three major parties actually agree on a single measure. And that was the case for the small and medium-sized tax cut, businesses tax cut. We all agreed on it. We all ran on this, including the Liberals. And we have the first budget, which actually states that the tax cut will be stopped at 10.5. And they even took credit during the budget speeches for that decrease, which was in the previous budget. So basically, they took credit for not bringing it up to 11%. I found that really disheartening because we brought this topic over and over again. And the reason why we brought this topic is that small and medium-sized businesses really expected, really counted on that tax cut. And they were planning for it because all three parties agreed. So I can tell you, Mr. Speaker, that I haven't seen one single small and medium-sized business representative, either from the CFIB or even my riding or even other ridings, who actually applauded the Liberals on this. On the contrary, the comments were scathing. So it's really disappointing to see that the Liberals are actually going to justify this breaking of their a key electoral promise by talking about anything else. I know that I don't have much time left. I'd like to point out also that the Finance Committee doesn't seem to understand the key role that it has to play in our democracy. This is no reflection on individual members of the committee who actually worked hard, asked good questions, but the role of the Finance Committee, like all committees, is actually to keep government to account. Le gouvernement fait des propositions.
The government makes proposals to bring forth new legislation or to amend legislation, and unfortunately this government doesn't seem to be listening to the opposition, as we've said, but through the introduction omnibus bills that gives us very little time to examine very complex measures, we can't play our role adequately, and that seems to satisfy the government members. Let me give you one example. Bank capitalization, that's a very important measure, and quite honestly, at the first glance, I'm in favor of it, but we have very technical legislation here, or a part of the legislation that's very technical, 25 pages, that completely amends the way our banks are protected in case of difficulty, the way the shareholders and account holders are protected, and we've hardly discussed this. We've heard no witnesses about this. We had one official who was very effective, Mr. Campbell, but we did not scrutinize that measure at all and look at all the issues that are important for the future of the country. So, Mr. Speaker, I think that with so little time, we didn't manage to do an adequate job. I know we have to adopt Bill C-15, even though we will oppose it, but the government has a majority. But I don't want to take this opportunity to extend a hand to the government and say, if you really want to respect your election promises, be more transparent. Table budget bills that really deal with the budget, that don't include measures like another measure, such as 20, 30 pages on fundamental issues for the future of the country. So we hope they'll learn from these mistakes. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Questions and comments. The Honourable Member for Saint-Maurice-Champlain. Mr. Speaker, first of all, I'd like to thank my honourable colleague for his significant contribution to the Finance Committee. I listened to the honourable colleague during his speech, and I can say that many of the points he raised are points that he had an opportunity to raise at the Finance Committee. We had many witnesses appear. He had an opportunity to put questions to them and get answers to contribute to the legislation. What I'd like to hear him talk about is, given all the measures here, during the election campaign, he talked about favoring the middle class and families. I'd like to hear him about the measures that we propose, such as tax cuts for 9 million Canadians. He comes from a rural riding like me, and the Canadian Child Benefit that will give $2,300 more per family. I'd like to hear him on the impact this will have for communities in his riding. Not just for communities, but I'd like to get back to small and medium-sized businesses as well. I heard my colleague make certain comments about that. And as the minister said, we think that a strong economy where we give money to middle-class families, to Canadian families, will also help small business. So I'd like to hear him about the social measures, budget measures that we put forward for the middle class and the impact it'll have in his riding.
The honourable member for Rimouski. Thank you for the question, Mr. Speaker. And my colleague participates in all the meetings of the committee. We've had a number of discussions. The question's a good one, and it was raised frequently at committee. When I speak to my constituents about tax cuts for SMEs, they're entirely in favor. That's not the problem, but there is a fair amount of criticism of the government in that regard. The government talks about 9 million taxpayers benefiting, and that'll benefit. It's true that's good for a lot of families, but if you don't have kids, that doesn't help you at all. So ultimately, I'm trying to understand the government's logic. They're always talking about this tax cut for the middle class. And there were promised tax cuts for SMEs, but those won't be implemented. So what they're saying is, well, we haven't kept one of our key promises because we're keeping another one. Those are two different things, one for families and the other for SMEs. I'd like the government to take note of that and act accordingly. Questions and comments? The honourable member for Salaberry-sur-Roi. Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I'd like to thank my colleague for his speech. It's always very enlightening and very specific. When it comes to cancelled tax cuts for SMEs in the Liberal budget, I'd like to know what negative impact, what type of repercussions will that have for SMEs, that broken promise. The Liberals promised during the campaign to reduce the taxes to encourage the hiring new hires of young people. They didn't talk about it in the budget. That would have encouraged a lot of companies to hire young people, and it would have enabled young people to build a future, starting with a job. And in our regions, it's hard to retain young workers in the regions, and small and medium-sized enterprises, SMEs, are at the front lines. They're the ones best placed to hire people and give young people, give them these good jobs. In under 60 seconds, the honourable member for Rimouski. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. That's an important question because the government says it wants to grow the economy and help out in this way, but it always remains in the abstract. The Conservatives tried their way. The Liberals are trying their way now. Is it going to work or not? We don't know. We'll see. But what's important for Canadians' confidence in their government is keeping promises, election promises, reducing taxes from 11 to 9% for SMEs. That's an unkept promise, and Canadians are aware of that. Same thing for the tax credit for hiring young people, for SMEs. That was not kept. Maybe it will be next year, maybe in 2 or 3 years. The future will tell. But what's clear right now is that the government appears to be quite willing to break its promises and do damage control later by saying that, well, we kept this promise and that promise instead. I don't think that's very useful or productive for economic growth. Thank you.
Honourable Minister of Finance.
Monsieur le Président.
Mr. Speaker, I appreciate this opportunity to speak on Bill C-15, which is part of our government's plan to strengthen the middle class and keep Canada's economy strong and growing for the long term. The measures in the budget implementation bill will enable us to move forward on our ambitions, on our ambitious economic agenda. It's an agenda that restores hope for the middle class by making smart, necessary investments in our country's future. It's a plan I was honored to table in this House on March 22nd.
Begin by emphasizing that we intend to take advantage of an historic opportunity. Thanks to the leadership of governments in the 1990s, Canada's debt position is by far the best in the G7. With interest rates at record lows, now is the time to invest in people and the economy and to prepare Canada for a brighter future. Budget 2016 will support the middle class now by helping Canadian families with important and necessary measures. And it lays the foundation for sustainable, long-term economic growth. In particular, on December 7th, 2015, we introduced the middle class tax cut. Nearly 9 million Canadians are now benefiting from lower taxes on every paycheck. As a second step, Budget 2016 introduced the new Canada Child Benefit. Compared to the existing system, the new Canada Child Benefit will be simpler, more generous, and tax-free. It will also be targeted to those who need it most. With the introduction of the Canada Child Benefit, about 300,000 fewer children will be living in poverty. In fact, the CCB represents the most significant social policy innovation in a generation. It means real help for real people, putting more money in the pockets of moms and dads to pay for everything from summer camp to new clothes. This is only part of what Bill C-15 does to help families directly. And in the past, I've spoken to this House about measures that will also help seniors, veterans, and students. Through their efforts, their innovation, and their integrity, Canadians are building a stronger economy for today and for future generations. And Mr. Speaker, they rightfully expect their government to work with them in support of those initiatives. And so, allow me to highlight a portion of the bill which I've seldom had the chance to address directly in this House. As members will know, in addition to helping families and making important investments, Bill C-15 also introduces a number of measures in support of our plan to ensure tax fairness and maintain the integrity of the tax system. As we've said many times, we believe all Canadians should be paying their fair share of taxes. Mr. Speaker, the budget was tabled before this issue dominated the international headlines this spring. And when it did, I'm proud to say that Canada was able to stand proud and highlight the action we had just announced in our plan to prevent underground economic activity and tax evasion, as well as aggressive tax planning. A cornerstone of our action is a $444 million investment over 5 years for the Canada Revenue Agency to enhance its efforts to crack down on tax evasion and combat tax avoidance. However, we all recognize that assessing tax revenues alone is not enough. And that's why Budget 2016 invests an additional $351.6 million over 5 years to improve the CRA's ability to go after and collect those outstanding tax debts. In addition, Canada's tax system needs ongoing adjustment to ensure that it's functioning as intended and contributing to the objective of an economy that works for everyone. We believe a stronger revenue base will help support our new investments in education, in infrastructure, in training, and in other programs that will help to secure a better quality of life for Canada's Indigenous peoples, building a stronger, more unified, and more prosperous Canada. These are just a few of the measures in this bill. Monsieur le Président.
But, Mr. Speaker, to ensure a brighter future for our kids and grandkids, we have to plan much further ahead. As we look out over the horizon, we see challenges. But we also see a whole world of opportunity. For starters, Canada's population is aging. The global economy is volatile. Oil prices are unpredictable. We need to take steps to improve competitiveness and productivity in Canada so that we become drivers of our own success now and a generation from now.
As our workforce ages and shrinks, real GDP growth has been forecast to slow from about 3% enjoyed since 1970 to slightly less than 2% over the next 15 years, a 1 percentage point drop. Productivity is key to a growing economy because when output per worker is higher, firms can pay their employees more, families can work less while earning more, and companies can return larger dividends to their investors or reinvest in the business. I'm proud to be working with my cabinet colleagues, the Ministers of Innovation, Trade, Labour, and Infrastructure, on delivering our long-term growth agenda. But we know that we don't have all the answers, and we're open to innovative new ideas. That's why, a few weeks ago, I hosted my inaugural meeting of the Advisory Council on Economic Growth. Through this Growth Council, we've brought together some of the best minds who bring a global perspective and wide-ranging experience that will help us shape the government's growth strategy. The Council will help generate bold and innovative ideas needed to create and sustain long-term economic growth that benefits the middle class and those that are working hard to join it. We want Canadians to be able to afford to send their kids to a quality daycare or help their teenagers with a college education and tuition. We want to make sure that every Canadian can put away enough money for a safe and secure retirement. To conclude, Mr. Speaker, we know that the challenges that we face will not be solved overnight or by a single budget. But we also know that good government is not just about today and tomorrow. It's also about the years and the decades to come. And that is where our focus will be, and it will continue to be there, Mr. Speaker. Merci.
Questions and comments? The Honourable Member for Carleton.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. It gives me a great pleasure to rise today and not only thank the Minister for his speech, but also inform the House that it's my birthday. Thank you. And I know in the interest of nonpartisanship, the Minister wants to bring joy to any parliamentarian on his or her birthday. And one way that he could do that is to announce that he will rise and vote in favor of the amendment to keep the Liberal promise to lower small business taxes to 9%. That would make the day of 700,000 middle-class small business owners who are the leading job creators for our country. And I think that the Liberal Party understands that because they committed in the last election that they would honor previous Conservative tax reductions for these great entrepreneurs. And there was an unfortunate mistake in the budget drafting which reversed that promise. I know that he will want to correct it. I wonder if he will rise today and announce that he will support this opposition amendment to his bill so that we can lower taxes for Canada's best job creators.
The Honourable Minister of Finance.
Mr. Speaker, I guess I'd like to start by saying happy birthday. It's a great day, I suppose, for at least one member on the opposite side of the House. I do want to say as well that I think it's a great day for Canadians when we talk about a budget bill that's going to help them and help their families. The member opposite points out that it's important to help those in the middle class. We recognize that so many Canadian business owners are themselves in the middle class. Our focus has very much been around helping Canadians to improve their lot in life. We've put a tax reduction in for middle-class Canadians, reducing taxes significantly, helping 9 million Canadians. Importantly, the kinds of things we're doing, that together with the change in the Canada Child Benefit, which will help 9 out of 10 families with children, will help people in this country that are working hard to have a good life with themselves and their families, that are going to purchase the goods and services provided by small and medium-sized enterprises. So in that regard, we know that we're going to help our economy. We know that we're going to help small and medium-sized businesses by growing the economy. More importantly, in the future, the kinds of measures that we're taking will improve our growth rate. That will raise the opportunity for all businesses in this country to be successful, and I'm sure will make future birthdays for my colleague across the way that much better. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Questions and comments? The honourable member for Regina Louvain.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The budget included a temporary extension of employment insurance benefits, supposedly in response to the drop in oil prices. Initially, the government announced that 12 regions would be included. It then added 3 more regions, but failed to include them in the legislation. So the NDP has tried to help out by putting forward an amendment to include those 3 regions. But even with that change, we're still in a situation where among the 8 EI regions in Alberta and Saskatchewan, 7 will receive the benefit extension, but Regina still will not. And I wonder if the Minister of Finance could explain if he thinks it's reasonable to exclude this one part of the 2 main oil and gas producing provinces from this EI benefit extension, and whether he could commit today to include Regina so that all of Alberta and Saskatchewan will be part of this extension of EI benefits for laid-off workers from the oil and gas sector. Thank you.
The Honourable Minister of Finance.
Mr. Speaker, I'd like to thank the member for his question, and I know he shares with all of us in this House a deep concern for people that have been affected by significant changes in the global economy that have resulted in significant changes in the price of oil in our country. Those impacts are being felt by Canadians across the country, but in particular in some hard-hit regions. We decided that we would like to focus on helping Canadians in multiple ways, generally across the country, recognizing that Canadians need to be supported in a time of economic challenge, and more specifically in certain regions. The general measures that we've put in around employment insurance we think are important. We made improvements in the EI system to allow people to get into the system more rapidly and increase the training that they can get access to. The specific measures help people in particular regions that have been particularly hard hit. We think that they're appropriate, and we are pleased to be able to do that to ensure that we allow our economy to do better in the future. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Resuming debate, the Honourable Member for Carleton.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. People love to cheer on the underdog. Think of movies like Rocky, Rudy, and Will Smith's Pursuit of Happiness, or great legends like David and Goliath. Speaking of another legend, Robin Hood, our opponents always tell us that the reason we need big government is to take from the rich to give to the poor. But big government always seems to send money in the opposite direction. The latest Bombardier bailout would take $1 billion middle-class tax dollars and give it to a company of billionaire owners and millionaire executives. Ontario's Green Energy Act forces low-income families to buy overpriced electricity from millionaire insiders. And government-mandated cartels in the taxi sector empower millionaire taxi plate owners to rip off cab drivers and their passengers. It's the insider economy. Those who can afford to lobby the government and game the rules of government always win with bigger government. The underdogs, well, they're left to fight their own battles. And we need to fight along their side. That means fighting for immigrants who are qualified as engineers or doctors, but forced into minimum wage jobs because bureaucracy blocks them from their professions. It means financial transparency, so an Aboriginal woman can hold her leaders accountable for how they spend her money. It means further lowering taxes for the poor so that work always pays more than welfare. And speaking of welfare, we should get tough on welfare for the incompetent millionaire CEO who's coming back to the government for yet another bailout and another handout from working-class taxpayers. Mr. Speaker, I believe that it is time that we shut down the insider economy and open up the free market economy, which is the greatest poverty-fighting machine ever invented. And in so doing, let us all become champions of Canada's underdogs. That is the basis upon which I approach any budget question. It has been proven time and time again that bigger and more bureaucratic government makes for poorer and less prosperous citizens. There are exceptions, of course. People with connections, people with well-paid lobbyists, they always do better. And we can expect that with recent Liberal announcements of new climate change, so-called climate change initiatives, we will see certain insiders who call themselves green energy entrepreneurs and consultants, they will make millions of dollars. They have made millions of dollars on the backs of working-class Ontarians ever since the passage of the so-called Green Energy Act, and they will make hundreds of millions of dollars more with the Ontario government's recent announcement, backed by this Prime Minister, that it will impose new taxes and regulations on Ontario families to pay for the enormous costs of the province's so-called climate change agenda. The recent budget set aside hundreds of millions of new dollars in new subsidies for these same insiders. And it is incumbent upon all of us to see who ends up getting the money. The question of social justice should weigh heavy on every single policy decision a government makes. And there are two questions we should ask, therefore, regarding social justice of every policy a government implements. And those questions are these: from whom? To whom? Any expenditure of money takes money from somebody and gives it to somebody else. This government has made a great rhetorical priority for the question of redistributing wealth. And I believe that they will redistribute a lot of wealth. But I believe also, on close examination, that redistribution will take money from the people who need it most and give it to the well-connected millionaire insiders that are most linked to the current government and its decision makers. And so over the next 3.5 years, my goal, and I hope the goal of the entire opposition, will be to stand up for those underdogs who actually earn their own money. And instead of those who are privileged and powerful and use that privilege and power to feast off the labors of other people. I think that you will see, Mr. Speaker, that the real champions of social justice are those who expound the free enterprise economy. Over the last 10 years, while the Conservative government was in power, people in the lowest 10% of income earners saw their incomes rise by 14%. That's after tax and after inflation. Middle-class Canadians saw their incomes rise by 10% after tax and after inflation. The share of wealth controlled by the top 1% actually declined in Canada, bucking trends to the contrary all around the world. So how is it then that the Liberal budget produced a graph that suggested that the middle class had not had a raise in 40 years? The information came from the finance department. I said it can't be true because we know that the last 10 years saw the middle class gain 10% after tax and inflation. So I said, how is it possible? So I went and looked at the data, and you know what? The Liberal budget was right. The after-tax incomes of people were just slightly higher in 2015 than they had been 40 years earlier after you account for inflation. How did that happen? The answer is that it actually took us 30 years to recover from the absolutely devastating economic policies of Pierre Elliott Trudeau. So the current Prime Minister is right. After you account for the devastating decline in middle-class incomes that occurred in the 70s and early 80s under the National Energy Program and the big government centralized socialist approach to government, it actually took us 3 decades to recover the income growth of Canadians. 3 decades, and I'm proud to say that the greatest growth of all, according to the Finance Department data that was highlighted in the Liberal budget, occurred in the last 10 years when the previous Conservative Prime Minister was leading the government. So it is true that the middle class did not have an effective raise from 40 years back to the present, but we in the last 10 years have been correcting for that. What is most troubling is that the government doesn't learn from the graph that it put in its own budget, because it is now repeating the very same policies that led to such devastating middle-class income declines. Expanding governments, out-of-control deficits, more and more regulations that hold people down and suffocate our entrepreneurs. Mr. Speaker, I ask that this government learn from history rather than repeating history. We know what works. We know what has failed. Let's look at the evidence and the facts and choose the right path, the path of the underdog, where Canadians get ahead based on their merit, not on their connections, where people who work hard, pay their taxes, and play by the rules can achieve great things for themselves, their families, and their communities, and where we shut down the insider economy and open up the free market economy as the greatest poverty-fighting machine the world has ever invented. Then and only then we can all say that we are champions of the underdog. Thank you.
Questions et commentaires, questions and comments. The honourable member for Gatineau.
Well, I want to thank the honourable member for that thunderclap from the failed school of supply-side economics. I guess they were going to get to that in the fourth mandate, Mr. Speaker. Mon ami en face.
My friend from across the way has talked about insiders, as if he didn't have files to defend. So I'd like to talk about insiders, and I'd like to ask him a question on insiders. We defined insiders, we feel that it's important, for example, to defend those who have lost their jobs, the parents of families that want to get out of poverty, farmers who have lost the Canada Wheat Board under their government. These are people who weren't insiders in the previous Conservative government. So I'd like to know how my colleague, the member across the way, defines this idea of insiders. These parents, these people who are unemployed, these farmers, and the way that they were treated in our budget. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The honourable member for Carleton.
Thankful for the member raising the plight of working low-income people, for example. Those people have benefited by our previous government's decision to raise the personal exemption, which literally liberated hundreds of thousands of people from taxes altogether. Many low-income people actually saw their income tax drop by 100%. While we were in government. We were proud to reward their hard work. We wanted to ensure that work always paid more than welfare, so that people who made the decision to enter the workforce and earn some money would always be better off. That was the approach that our previous government took. And speaking of supply-side economics, they are the ones who believe in trickle-down government. This notion that if they tax enough from working families, from the poor, from the middle class, and then they take that money and give it to powerful and wealthy insiders like the billionaires who control Bombardier, like the so-called green energy entrepreneurs who have made hundreds of millions of dollars off of artificially inflated electricity contracts, that somehow that money is going to trickle down and help the poor. We know that doesn't work. It doesn't trickle down. It's people on the ground who work hard that lift us all up, and those are the people on whose side we are going to fight.
Questions et commentaires, l'honorable.
Questions and comments. The Honourable Member for Rimouski, Nejet, Témiscouata, Les Basques. Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I'd like to thank my colleague from Carleton for his speech. Obviously, there aren't many links to be made between the NDP and the Conservative economic plans, but I'm sure he agrees with me if we say that there's one thing that all parties agreed on in the election campaign was the reduction in taxes from 9 to 11% for small businesses. Now, when I talk to my constituents, and particularly to the small and medium-sized businesses in my riding, well, they expected, and they were planning for over the next 2 to 4 years, new investments to hire, to increase the salaries of their employees, and now they find that they can't do that. They're having to change their plans for growing their business and their future growth plans. So I'd like to hear my colleague talk about the effects of this in his riding, the small businesses in his riding, of how businesses are going to have to adjust given that the Liberals broke this promise. The Honourable Member for Carleton. It's interesting, Mr. Speaker. All the parties agreed that we should reduce taxes on our small and medium-sized businesses, and that's why we put it in our budget in 2015, and the Liberals, in their election platform, committed to respecting that tax reduction for our entrepreneurs. What's interesting is that for the next 5 years, the Liberals will take away $2 billion from our small businesses because of this broken promise. At the same time, as the two Liberal governments of Quebec and Canada will give that same $2 billion to Bombardier, a business controlled by billionaires. Mr. Speaker, we would prefer that that money stays in the pockets of the entrepreneurs who have earned it instead of giving it to a business as a subvention, to a business that's very close with the Liberal government. So that's the different approach.
Of small business people who earned it rather than giving it to the billionaires who did not.
Reprise du débat, l'honorable.
Resuming debate, the Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Finance.
To thank the honourable member. First of all, it might be a great day for the member for Cambridge because it's its birthday, but it's even a better day for Canadians, Mr. Speaker. It's going to be a great year for Canadians. So it might be a great day for him, but it's a great year for Canadians. Mr. Speaker, I was deeply disturbed when I listened to the member of Cambridge talking against Canadian industry. That's not the first time that I've heard him do that. He did that just yesterday again, talking against our aerospace industry. And when he talks about insiders, Mr. Speaker, I wish I would have had the opportunity to ask him, who does he consider insiders among the 9 million Canadians to whom we reduced taxes since January 1st of this year? Perhaps the 9 families out of 10 in Canada who are going to receive more benefits through our Canada Child Benefit? Perhaps the 300,000 children, Mr. Speaker, who are going to be lifted out of poverty? Or maybe he's talking about the 250,000 students who are going to be better off with our student grants. Or perhaps, Mr. Speaker, I think he's talking about the 900,000 seniors who are going to be better off with our budget. So when I listen to the member from Cambridge, I'm deeply perplexed. I respect him a lot, but I'm deeply perplexed when he's talking about insiders. Maybe that was their way of doing government. But, Mr. Speaker, our government is about the middle class. It's about middle-class families. It's about helping Canadian families. And it's about helping Canadians, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I had the great privilege of going across this nation with the Minister of Finance. I, for myself, went from Moncton to Yellowknife, Mr. Speaker, engaging with thousands of Canadians, talking about what was their dream, what was concerning them. And I know the Minister of Finance did the same. He went from Halifax to Vancouver, and we engaged with Canadians, Mr. Speaker. This was unprecedented. I think the member would be interested in listening to that. A different way of doing government, Mr. Speaker. Open, talking with Canadians, something that this previous government has not been doing very much, Mr. Speaker, which is engaging with Canadians. And everywhere I went, Mr. Speaker, I wish you would have been with me. You would have seen how many Canadians showed up in our meetings to engage with us, to talk to us about what was their dream and what they wanted for this economy. So, Mr. Speaker, let me tell you what people said. People said us two simple things. They said, help me and my family and help us grow the economy. So when people have told us, help me and my family, Mr. Speaker, we responded. We responded very much, and I would like to apologize. He's the member from Carleton, not for Cambridge, so I know he's listening carefully and he knows what I meant when I was saying it's not a member for Cambridge, but was the member for Carleton, and he's smiling, so well, at least if it's the only mistake I've made, Mr. Speaker, I'll take it, because when I listen to my colleagues on the other side, I would say, with the mistakes they've made, I would not be boasting in this House, Mr. Speaker. But, Mr. Speaker, let me get back to Canadians. That's what we're here for, Mr. Speaker. So Canadians tell us, help me and my family. So the first thing this government did, Mr. Speaker, was to reduce tax for Canadians. 9 million Canadians, the insiders that the member from Carleton is talking about, the 9 million Canadians who are paying less taxes since January 1st of this year, Mr. Speaker. These people wanted to help. You know why, Mr. Speaker? Because they were hurting. They were saying, I did not see growth in my income, Mr. Speaker. For the last 10 years of this previous government, I've seen nothing to show for. And therefore, we reduced taxes for these people. After that, Mr. Speaker, we went and we did something for families. The Canada Child Benefit, Mr. Speaker, one of the most progressive policies since universal health care in our country, Mr. Speaker. And let me tell you what this is all about. This is about helping the insiders that the member of Carleton is talking about, the 9 families out of 10 in Canada, which he refers to insiders. Mr. Speaker, these insiders will benefit from a much simpler allocation to help children, to raise children, to buy clothes, to send the children to camps this summer. Mr. Speaker, this allocation is going to be even non-taxable. And we're talking about $2,300 more in the pocket on average for Canadian families. Think about that, Mr. Speaker. Let's get back to what it means for people. If you look at a riding like mine in Saint-Maurice-Champlain, where the average income is probably one of the lowest in the country, that may have maybe 10% of additional disposable income in a family. Mr. Speaker, that is very significant. And I'm very proud to be on this side of this House, because those are the measures that are going to help Canadian families. And those are the measures that are meaningful for people. This is not about talk, this is about action, Mr. Speaker. We did promise during the campaign that we would be there for Canadian families. For once, this is the government of families. This is the government of middle-class Canadians, those who are working hard to join it. Not the government of the insiders of the previous government, Mr. Speaker, that they like to refer to. But let me tell you what people said, Mr. Speaker. After they said, help me and my family, they said, why don't we grow the economy for a difference? You know, after 10 years of low growth in this country, they just say, can we have a bit of growth in this country? And we answered, Mr. Speaker. We answered. We answered with our infrastructure program, Mr. Speaker. We're talking about $120 billion over 10 years. We're talking in phase 1, $11.9 billion, Mr. Speakers. For what? Let's talk about that for a minute. We're talking about public transit, something that is dearly needed in our cities. Goods and people need to move in our cities. I've been in many cities where people say, we need public transit. And I see that you're suggesting that I should sit down, and it's Friday. I'll listen to you, Mr. Speaker, and I thank you for that.
We'll break for a question period, and once the session resumes, then the honourable member will have another 4 minutes and 30 seconds, plus 5 minutes of questions. Statements by members. Déclaration.
Statements by members. The honourable member for La Pointe de l'Île. Mr. Speaker, under the UN Charter, all peoples have the right to self-determination, that is, to determine freely their own political status as well as their economic, social, and cultural development. The case of self-determination of peoples is part of the movement for cultural diversity and linguistic diversity worldwide in Scotland, Catalonia, Palestine, Kabylie, and Quebec. I'd like to point out the trip to Ottawa of a militant for the self-determination of the Kabyle people, Ms. Kamira Naïtsid, president of the Amazigh World Congress. On behalf of the Bloc Québécois and Quebec sovereigntists, I want to express our solidarity with the Kabyle people in its struggle for freedom, cultural and linguistic identity. We think, like you do, that fair globalization and peace will not come out of domination, but respect between peoples. Long life to the Free Kabylie.
Lawrence.
Bonjour, Monsieur le Président. Je me lève.
Today, Mr. Speaker, I rise to celebrate the feast of the Italian Republic.
Migrated to Canada in search of a new life, and here they have found one. Whether through our skill, intellect, music, food, and yes, our wine, Italian Canadians have contributed richly to the culture and prosperity of this great country. Here in this House, it is a privilege to follow in the footsteps of many Italian Canadians who came before me and to serve with colleagues now on both sides of the aisle who have Italian roots. I invite them and indeed all members to join us for Italian Day on the Hill on June 15th, when we will celebrate the heritage and values of the over 1.5 million members of the Italian Canadian community. Vive l'Italie et vive Canada! Bravo!
The honourable member for Saskatoon, Grasswood.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm pleased to rise today to tell you about the Saskatchewan Rush, a professional lacrosse team based in my city of Saskatoon. The Rush are members of the National Lacrosse League. The team relocated from Edmonton last year after capturing the championship. Now the team has a chance, Mr. Speaker, to win back-to-back championships. Tomorrow they will host the Buffalo Bandits in the second game of a best-of-3 championship. The Rush won the opening game in Buffalo last week. Over 15,000 fans will be on hand tomorrow night at SaskTel Centre. We wish head coach Derek Keenan and the entire team the best of luck as Canada's national game, lacrosse, will be highlighted tomorrow in Saskatoon and Saskatchewan.
The honourable member for Sault Ste. Marie.
Mr. Speaker, today I rise in this House to pay honour and tribute to a former Sault Ste. Marie Mayor, Alex Harry. Mr. Harry had passed away just recently, and he was a great advocate for our community. He served as mayor, as an alderman, was a successful lawyer, the area director for legal aid, and served on boards of Sault College, St. Mary's River Bridge Company, Algoma Public Health, and others. While mayor, he led the charge to amalgamate Cora to the city of Sault Ste. Marie. He opened the Centennial branch of the Sault Public Library and spearheaded the creation of Algoma College, which is now Algoma University. He was a devout husband of 60 years to Shirley, a proud father, a proud grandfather, and a good friend and a staunch Liberal. He did many great things for this community. He helped me out when I started my political career. And the people of the riding, they describe him as kind, intelligent, humble, devout, but the best way to describe Alex is a perfect gentleman. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in celebrating his life today in the House of Commons.
The honourable member for Saskatoon West.
Mr. Speaker, it's a tremendous honour to be able to rise in the House today and recognize Ms. Maria Jane Linkletter, an elder, mentor, cultural leader, and residential school survivor living and teaching in Saskatoon West. Maria was born on Thunderchild First Nation, is proudly Plains Cree, and is unmatched in her capacity for generosity, kindness, and strength. On May 27th, Maria won the 2016 YWCA Women of Distinction Award for Community Building in Saskatoon and duly received a standing ovation. By almost any definition, Maria has raised and guided an entire community. Much of her life has been dedicated to child welfare, and she has personally cared for over 350 foster children, each time providing these children a safe and loving environment while encouraging pride in their cultural identity. As a testament to her character, her acceptance speech consisted of only 5 words: all women are winners. I encourage you to join me in congratulating Maria on this honor. Thank you very much.
The honourable member for Canada Carleton.
Mr. Speaker, I stand today to salute the wonderful career and contributions of Chris Phillips, who played his entire 19-year and 1,293 game career for the Ottawa Senators in my riding of Canada Carleton. He also represented Canada as a World Junior, winning the gold medal twice, 1996 and 1997. In addition to his on-ice success, Chris and his wife Erin have become pillars in the Ottawa community, lending support to over 20 charities: Candlelighters, CHEO, Hockey Fights Cancer, Movember, Ottawa Dragon Boat Festival, STEP Project, North Project, Snowsuit Fund, and the Queensway Carleton Hospital Foundation, and so many more. He's also worked hard to raise awareness and funds for his hometown of Fort McMurray. Please join me to thank Chris Phillips for his service to Ottawa and wish him and his wife, Erin, and their 3 children a happy retirement.
The honourable member for Caribou, Prince George.
Mr. Speaker, I'd like to rise in this House to speak about one of my many great organizations in my riding in Caribou, Prince George. In 2015, Paul and Terry Nichols founded the Communities for Veterans Foundation, riding across Canada on horseback. Their goal is to bring awareness to communities about the changing face of Canadian veterans suffering from PTSD and to help veterans transition from military culture into civilian culture through equine therapy. Beginning on May 22nd, 10 veterans from across the country suffering from PTSD took part in a 14-day equine therapy program, where they were paired with a horse for the duration of their stay, learning to care for their horse's physical and mental needs. The course provides veterans with awareness and skills that are transferable outside the arena and into relationships, work, and the community. Today, those 10 veterans graduate from this program. To our veterans and first responders who are suffering from PTSD, please know you're not alone. And I'd also like to thank Paul and Terry for the contributions they are making, not only in Caribou, Prince George, but across Canada. Thank you.
Honourable member for La Prairie. Mr. Speaker, today I'd like to talk to you about an exceptional woman, the daughter of a farmer and a psychosocial worker, Maria Labrec Duchesneau, founded Au Cours des Familles in 2000, a unique group in Canada that has a mission to provide mutual help within the farm world. I've had the opportunity to frequent her as president of this organization and see the work she's accomplished. Among her many achievements, the creation of the concept of Travailleurs de Rang, the establishment of the Agricultural Pride Association, the development of a guide for rural areas, and respite houses for farmers. Her commitment has been beneficial for the farm world. Today, Maria will get an honorary doctorate from McGill University to underscore her work and her involvement. That's why I want to take advantage of these few minutes in the House to express all my gratitude. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The honourable member for Vimy. Mr. Speaker.
Enhances our community spirit. Today, I'm proud to honor 2 individuals from Vimy. Marie-Ève Gauthier, éducatrice de la petite enfance.
An early childhood educator, won the 2015 Prime Minister's Award for Excellence in Early Childhood Education at Centre La Petite Enfance du Pic-Bois. The award recognizes contributions in care for ages 0 to 5. Second, Samuelson Vachon, a young talented musician, has been selected to join the National Youth Orchestra of Canada. After years of rigorous training and perfection, he will be traveling around the country and around the world to play for thousands of people.
Congratulate them on their achievement and for exhibiting excellence in their personal and professional affairs. They are an inspiration for us all. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member for Battle River Crowfoot.
Mr. Speaker, I rise today to congratulate the Camrose and District Chamber of Commerce for winning the 2015-16 Chamber of the Year Award for the under 650 member category. Since 1908, the Camrose and District Chamber has served our local businesses, entrepreneurs, and professionals. Most recently, the Camrose Chamber has earned a high profile for their work on policy development with the Alberta Chamber and also the Alberta Chamber of Commerce and also the Canadian Chamber. In my large rural riding, there are other chambers and local organizations. Both large and very small, their members work hard to keep them strong and are able to serve the smallest towns and villages and even the most remote communities. They host many events that help local businesses. They provide an educational role for entrepreneurs and build a strong network for local business communities. I congratulate all members of local chambers of commerce in Battle River Crowfoot.
The honourable member for Winnipeg North.
Yes, Mr. Speaker, on June 4 at the Philippine Cultural Center in Winnipeg, people will witness a flag-raising ceremony which will begin a week-long celebration of Filipino heritage and pride. Here in Ottawa, we'll be having a flag-raising ceremony on June 9. Both flag-raising ceremonies are meant to recognize a significant date in history. It was on June 12, 1898 in Cavite where the Filipino community witnessed the public reading of the Declaration of Independence. The national flag was also unveiled along with the singing of the new Filipino national anthem. The Philippines is a beautiful country, a place where I have been on many occasions, most recently with my daughter Cindy in 2014. My desire is to see an expanded relationship between Philippines and Canada, and as the co-chair of the Canada-Philippines Friendship Group here in Ottawa, we will promote Filipino heritage and a better relationship between our two great nations. On behalf of the Prime Minister and my caucus, I stand to acknowledge 118 years of Philippine independence and to say to my kababayans and friends, let us celebrate our diversity and treasure our heritage. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The member for York Centre.
Mr. Speaker, June 2nd was the 70th anniversary of the proclamation of the Italian Republic. This marked the beginning of a new era for Italy of rebuilding the country and its relationships. We now count the Italian Republic as one of our closest friends and allies. In the past 70 years, many Italians looked abroad for a country which could give them a new beginning for themselves and their families. Canada was one of those countries. We now count 1.5 million Canadians of Italian heritage among us. Mr. Speaker, my riding of York Centre has a large and vibrant Italian community who built their lives and our communities and our cities. I am proud to represent a riding that serves as such a model of our diversity. Auguri alla Repubblica Italiana per questo anniversario e grazie alle comunità italo-canadese per il suo ruolo nella vita del Canada.
The honourable member for Yorkton Melville.
Mr. Speaker, our friends in Newfoundland and Labrador are suffering from the provincial Liberals' tax increase on gasoline. Rather than provide a plan to grow the economy, Newfoundland and Labrador's Liberal government has chosen to raise taxes. The old Liberal tax and spend approach only succeeds to lower the standard of living for hardworking Canadian families. This disappointing choice made by the Liberals in Newfoundland and Labrador should remind all Canadians that the low taxes we are benefiting from right now are not permanent and governments can always raise them. As a Conservative, I stand with my colleagues to keep taxes low for a better plan to grow our economy.
The honourable member for Châteauguay-Lacolle.
Mr. Speaker, as we are celebrating tourism in Canada, I'm delighted to invite all members to visit beautiful Châteauguay-Lacolle, a region hugging the south shore of Montreal and boasting many attractions.
For example, we have the Circuit du Paysan, a route that meanders through the Montérégie that can be used by car or by bike to discover unique local products and architectural treasures. One can visit Saint-Cyprien-Napierville, the birthplace of the mythical strongman Louis Cyr. There is also the Fiesta des Cultures de Saint-Rémy, a cultural exchange that notes the presence of our foreign workers to make us discover Latin America through history, gastronomy, and art.
Least, Ile Saint-Bernard in Châteauguay offers terrific eco-friendly activities such as discovery cruises and a nature interpretation center. I'm looking forward to seeing one and all in Châteauguay-Lacolle. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member for Skeena-Bulkley Valley.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Sunday is World Environment Day, a day we celebrate in over 100 countries every year on June 5th to raise awareness about the positive steps we can take to protect our planet. Comme à tous les jours, les néo-démocrates.
Like every day, New Democrats are committed to making sure that Canada is a positive example for the struggle against climate change and is committed to restoring environmental protection that was voided by the Conservatives.
Not enough from this new government that moves us beyond the Conservatives' weak climate change targets and the protections for our lakes, rivers, and fish and wildlife habitat that the Conservatives tore to shreds. On
this day, we're also celebrating Canada's positive transition to a greener and cleaner economy.
Democrats call on the government to take action to repair the damage done and to get to work setting the course for a positive and prosperous future. On behalf of Canada's New Democrats, I want to wish the House and all Canadians a happy World Environment Day. Bonne journée mondiale de l'environnement.
Happy World Environment Day.
For Fort McMurray, Cold Lake.
Mr. Speaker, I will be
forever grateful for the incredible support and compassion of the Canadian people. I can only begin to express how thankful I am to all the firefighters, emergency responders, and everyone involved in making our city safe. To all those Canadians who have generously given to the Red Cross, and to my colleagues here today who have continued to offer their generous support, I thank you. Mr. Speaker, in the coming weeks and months, residents of Fort McMurray will be returning to their homes where they will begin to pick up the pieces and rebuild from this tragedy. Business owners and residents alike, already hit hard by the low oil prices, will need assistance from the federal government. We understand that no one will work harder or do a better job at rebuilding Fort McMurray than those people who call it home. Contractors and construction companies in Fort McMurray that were hit hardest by the downturn must be on the front lines of rebuilding our city. Just as Fort McMurray will come together to rebuild, this House has come together and put aside its political differences and rallied behind my city. And I'd like to wish my wife a happy birthday, and thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member for Ajax.
Mr. Speaker, next week there will be hundreds of thousands of Canadians who will be celebrating Ramadan. In my own riding, there will be many thousands, and of course across the world, hundreds of millions. And I want to take this opportunity to wish all of those who are celebrating Ramadan, Ramadan Mubarak. Last year, I had the opportunity to fast for the entire period of Ramadan. It's something I'm going to do again in support of a charity called Give 30. And that is to take the money that you save from fasting every day to give to those that are more needy, and particularly food banks. When I fasted, it was an incredible experience to feel what it was like to be hungry. And of course, I got relief at the end of the day. But for many children, unfortunately in Canada, around the world, that relief never comes. They have to make it through a day and try to learn and try to prepare for their future without the aid of food. This charity gives an opportunity to reflect upon that and use the power of Ramadan to help others. Thank you.
Oral questions, question orale. The honourable member for Battle River, Crowfoot.
Mr. Speaker, yesterday the Liberals finally showed Canadians how they really plan to decide on a new electoral process. And it's the same old Liberal way, behind closed doors. In typical Liberal fashion, they cooked up a deal that leaves Canadians on the outside looking in. Canadians do not want the future of their democracy decided by secret deals and party insiders. When will they open the doors to Canadians and agree to hold a national referendum?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Democratic Institutions.
Well, Mr. Speaker, yesterday we showed exactly how Parliament can work together by reaching across and finding common ground. The reality is we reached out as well to the Conservative Party, asked them if we could make this unanimous. I still hold out that hope, particularly when I read a tweet that they sent on May the 12th that says to the NDP, this is one issue we could agree on with respect to the motion that was put forward yesterday. So I'm confused. If they agreed with it on May 12th, if they thought it was a good idea on May 12th, if they thought this was a productive process, why are they not working with us now, Mr. Speaker?
The honourable member for Battle River, Crowfoot.
Well, Mr. Speaker, Canadians overwhelmingly agree that we need a national referendum. In fact, almost 14 million Canadians, 3/4 of eligible voters, voted in the last national referendum, the Charlottetown Accord, in 1992. To equal those numbers, 40,000 Canadians would have to show up in town halls all across this country in every constituency in Canada. Why is the minister denying Canadians, the average Canadians, that right to vote in a referendum?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Democratic Institutions.
Speaker, in the last Parliament, we saw exactly how we don't want to deal with an issue like electoral reform. We saw the Conservatives bring forward an election act that didn't consult Canadians at all. In fact, it didn't even consult Elections Canada. They accepted no amendments. They did refuse to work with other parties. What you saw yesterday is a new approach. reaching across the aisle and saying, let's find middle ground, giving up a majority even when we have one, saying that we have to compromise to ensure that we improve our electoral system and make it stronger for Canadians. That recognizes that more than 60% of Canadians voted to have a new electoral system in the last election.
The honourable member for Battle River Crowfoot.
Mr. Speaker, why don't Liberals trust average Canadians? Mr. Speaker, Canada has the strongest democracy in the world. An overwhelming majority of Canadians believe that something as important, as vital, as the way that we elect our members of Parliament, something that we've done over the last 150 years quite well, by the way, should be decided in a national referendum. Why are the Liberals more committed to backroom deals, to secret deals, than to giving Canadians a voice through a national referendum?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Democratic Institutions.
Categorize reaching out to every single party and asking what their ideas were and try to find unanimity as a backroom deal. The reality is they had every opportunity in this process to move amendments yesterday. Did they move a single amendment? No. They had every opportunity today to talk about how they could improve this committee process to engage Canadians. Did they take that opportunity? No. We gave an opportunity in the motion, in the amendment we moved, for them to discuss these issues. The forum is there in the committee. If they want to discuss how to engage and get the support of Canadians, participate in the process, help improve our democracy.
The honourable member for Richmond, Arthabaska.
Mr. Speaker, yesterday Canadians got quite a surprise with the Liberal NDP coalition. Imagine the Prime Minister saying referendums block change. What a lack of respect for Canadians. And the NDP is in cahoots with them. Canadians are intelligent. Any self-respecting democracy would let its people decide such a fundamental issue by referendum. Mr. Speaker, can the Minister confirm that a referendum will follow her consultations?
The Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Democratic Institutions.
Était une surprise, certainement.
It was a surprise, of course. It was a surprise that all parties in the House of Commons can work together and find consent, mutual consent, and consensus, rather, and we hope the Conservative Party will work with us to try to find a way to improve our electoral system. This is a huge opportunity for Canada. It's time to get down to work. The Honourable Member for Richmond Arthabaska. Mr. Speaker, I don't understand the Prime Minister's stubborn opposition to a referendum. Yesterday, his own minister left the door open a crack to a referendum. The day before, the member for Mount Royal said he wasn't against a referendum. It was still an option. Last month, the House Leader initially rejected the idea, but then showed some openness to it. Mr. Speaker, the government says it wants to be open, transparent, and trustworthy. So why don't they clearly say to Canadians that after the consultations, they'll have the final word in a referendum? The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary. Mr. Speaker, the Conservative Party said on the internet that they supported the idea of all parties working together without a Liberal majority. And now the Conservatives are against it. There's an opportunity here, and I hope the Conservative Party will work with us to discuss issues like this on the committee to improve our electoral system. The Honourable Member for Hochelaga. Mr. Speaker, the Transport Minister just tasked his department with accelerating the withdrawal of the DOT 111 tanker cars. What a coincidence, because the Transport Committee is in Lac-Mégantic aujourd'hui. It sure smacks of seat of the pants. It's not very serious. The minister's been in his position for 7 months and only today decided to start thinking about it, and yet the TSB sounded the alarm a long time ago. Can the minister cut the spin and finally tell us when the DOT 111s will be taken offline? The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary. Mr. Speaker, the government recognizes the importance of ensuring rail safety, and that's why we're investing $53 million to improve rail safety and the transportation of dangerous goods. This year, we'll be spending $10.9 million on updating over 400 level crossings in the country. That's a positive development in the improvement of rail safety. The Honourable Member for Hochelaga. When he was in Lac-Mégantic, the minister gave them a geography lesson but refused to respond to their concerns. A resident summarized by saying, "I thought it was a charm offensive to try to calm residents, and I think it was off mark." The demands of the residents of Lac-Mégantic are simple. Could the minister finally listen to them and commit to repairing existing rail and funding a bypass? The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Infrastructure. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. As I said, the government acknowledges the importance of improving rail safety, and indeed, the minister visited Lac-Mégantic. He listened to the residents and continues to listen to those who experienced that disaster, and our thoughts are with them. And we would mention once again that the committee is there today to listen. One thing is clear, rail safety is essential to us.
Or Skeena, Bulkley Valley.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I smile only because only Conservatives could call a proposal we made in public 4 months ago in a debate that we had in the floor of the House of Commons a backroom deal. But look, after 8 months of political impasse and a discredited process from the government, New Democrats were proud to put forward a motion to engage all parties in Parliament to create a process that is fair for the millions of Canadians that we represent. Now that the logjam has been cleared, what is the government going to do to ensure that all Canadians, that all MPs have the resources and tools available so that all Canadians can participate in this historic process?
Before going on to the parliamentary secretary, like, my ears are getting older, and all this chatter back and forth really makes it difficult for me to hear. So I would ask everyone to respect the process and let the one person who has the floor speak. Thank you. The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to Democratic Institutions.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And I want to thank the member opposite, not just for the motion, but for the collaborative spirit with which he's been operating on this file. It's my hope that that will pervade this entire process. Because if we're going to change our electoral system, if we're going to ensure that Canadians have a better way to express their democratic will, then it's going to take everyone in this House working together. In terms of how we move forward from this point, I'm glad that the motion has a clear date for where that committee is going to be set. So it will be a maximum of 10 days after it's approved. The committee does need to be resourced so it can travel across the country. We need to support every MP to have town halls in all 338 ridings.
The Honourable Member for Skeena, Bulkley Valley.
Mr. Speaker, after decades of fighting for a more equal voting process, civil society groups are keen to mobilize Canadians for change. We have created together an historic opportunity to engage millions of Canadians who have been turned off and tuned out of our politics. What specific tools? We're looking for specific tools that MPs can use and that will the government create with us to reach out to young people, Aboriginal Canadians, people living in poverty, to finally open the door to all Canadians. Thank you.
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to Minister of
certainly
Democratic
we want to work
Institutions.
with not only the member opposite, with all members in this House to ensure that all Canadians are included in this process, particularly those who've traditionally been disenfranchised. That, of course, will mean travel and going directly to talk with these groups. It will mean using innovative digital means to ensure that Canadians can engage, particularly when they're remote or where that connection physically is otherwise difficult for them. And I think the spirit that Parliament shows is incredibly important. And this I turn to all members of the House, and specifically to the Conservative Party, to say that there's an opportunity to take the issues they have, the concerns they have, to focus them through the committee process. We've opened that door. Work with us, and let's improve our democracy.
Before I go to the next question, I just want to thank the honourable members. That was really much easier for me to hear. The honourable member for Lanark, Frontenac, Kingston.
I think they all fell silent in anticipation of my question, Mr. Speaker. The Prime Minister, Mr. Speaker, favours a ranked ballot and always has. And what a surprise, his government has turned around and hired an activist for ranked ballots to advocate on behalf of ranked ballots. This is all before any committee process. Well, so the message is very clear. The fix is in, as it has always been, for the Liberals' preferred system. But Canadians are sending a message back. The Liberals can choose this system, but they must let the voters vote on it in a referendum. Right. Will the government allow a referendum so that Canadians decide whether or not the new proposed system is better or worse than the status quo?
The Honorary Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Democratic Institutions.
Well, Mr. Speaker, I listened to the member opposite say not very long ago, maybe a couple of weeks ago, that there was no way the Liberals would change their position. They're intransigent. They're forcing through a committee we don't agree with. There's a better proposal that we support from the NDP. Why can't they work with that proposal? And of course, we did that. We talked to the member. We said, let's try to find unanimity. And now they don't support that. So I don't know. Their position on this, their refusal to work with us, I'm confused by it. I would encourage them. We put wording into the amendment that we move forward in the main motion that allows them to have the type of discussion they want at committee, participate. Let's get this process moving forward.
The Honourable Member for Lanark, Frontenac, Kingston.
I look forward to equal flexibility from the government on the issue of referendum. One good reason for that would be that 73% of Canadians are in favour of holding a referendum on the Liberal government's proposal to change the way we vote. Canadians should have the final say. Canadians want the final say. But the government seems to have predetermined that it wants a particular proposal, ranked ballots. It's already hired a specialist to communicate in favour of ranked ballots. Why doesn't the Prime Minister abandon that path and let Canadians decide in a referendum on what is the appropriate method for allowing us to have elections in the future?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
The member opposite himself has said that first past the post isn't the best system. The member himself from the Conservative Party, the critic, has said that we can do better. And so what I would suggest is let's get to the work of making a better system, of creating a system that works better for Canadians. And then, if he feels that that process of working together and having consensus isn't good enough, then let's talk about the ways that we can engage Canadians further. But to give up on the process before it began, to not even have a dialogue on how to improve our democracy, Mr. Speaker, I don't accept that. Let's get to work. Let's be positive.
The Honourable Member for Lethbridge.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, regardless of the backroom deal that has been conjured up between the NDP and the Liberals, the facts are still straight on this. There's absolutely no the Liberals are not bound by the decision being made by this committee. The Cabinet will go ahead and decide on the system that it prefers. And at the end of the day, the Liberals still have a majority of members on this committee. And so Canadians understand that their interests are not served by this committee's formation, and they would like to have a voice on this matter. Will the members opposite agree to hold a referendum?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Democratic Institutions.
Mr. Speaker, the committee hasn't even met yet. So to say that the committee isn't working effectively, I think, is a little premature. The reality is we don't have a majority on that committee that the opposition parties do, and it's going to require, for anything to happen in that committee, the consent and work of the House. I did see closed-room deals, where I did see Canadians excluded, was unfortunately on the Unfair Elections Act or in the In-N-Out scandal or on the prorogation of Parliament. We saw a decade of Canadians being locked out of our democratic process. We don't want to continue that, Mr. Speaker. We've turned over a new leaf that includes working with other parties, including the Conservative Party.
The Honourable Member for Lethbridge.
Mr. Speaker, the Minister likes to talk about using social media, but perhaps she's unaware that only 20% of Canadians have access to Twitter. Meanwhile, 68% of all eligible voters showed up in the last election. And historically on referenda, even more individuals come out to vote. And so a referendum will allow millions more Canadians to participate in this process than the Minister's flawed initiative. Will the Minister opposite give Canadians a say? Will the Minister hold a referendum? Yes or no?
Yeah. The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
Well, Mr. Speaker, maybe it's because only 20% of Canadians are on Twitter that they thought that they could post they were going to support the ND proposal and then not. And maybe that's why they thought they could get away with it. But the reality is, the Minister has talked about a myriad of ways for Canadians to engage, and of course those include digital means. We live in a digital age where many Canadians are in remote locations or have disabilities or have other challenges that don't allow them to engage directly. The news is Twitter is one medium, but there are many mediums, and we want to engage Canadians in every single one of them. That's the type of consultation they deserve. That's the kind of consultation they're going to get.
L'honorable député de
The Honourable Member for Lévis-Lobinière. Mr. Speaker, the Minister of Democratic Institutions' electoral reform is just a scheme to manipulate Canadians. Why doesn't this Liberal government trust the 26 million Canadians on the voters list and let them say how they feel about it in a referendum? The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to Democratic Institutions. Mr. Speaker, in the last election campaign, we made a promise to change our democratic system to make sure that every individual in Canada has the ability to express their ideas about the type of government they want. To us, that's a promise we're going to keep. Absolutely. It's important to work together to change and improve our electoral system. Now, a member for Lévis-Lotbinière. Mr. Speaker, we all know a referendum would express the wishes of the 26 million Canadians on the voters list. Why, Mr. Speaker, does this government think electoral reform in Canada should be decided by a committee of just 12 individuals? Politicians. The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary. Mr. Speaker, there's a committee. On the committee, there's an opportunity to discuss not just among MPs, but with all kinds of people about ways to improve our system. And in the course of that process, there's an opportunity to think of ways to improve the system. I hope the Conservative Party will work with us on that.
Member for Saskatoon West.
Mr. Speaker, after the Liberal leader promised he'd be the pro-pot Prime Minister, Canadians are becoming increasingly concerned about the Liberals' rightward shift. They appointed a former police chief to handle the issue, who then encouraged police to crack down on marijuana while continuing to hand out criminal records. And now they've appointed Anne McClellan, who has called pot more dangerous than cigarettes and was even against medicinal marijuana. How can the Liberals justify sounding more law and order on pot than even the Conservatives, who just voted for decriminalization?
The Honourable Minister of Justice.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I think thanks for the question. As we've said, our government is committed to the legalization of marijuana, strictly regulating and restricting access to marijuana, with the ultimate objective to keep it out of the hands of children and keep the proceeds out of the hands of criminals. I'm looking forward, working with my colleagues, the Ministers of Health and Public Safety, to, in the coming weeks, announcing a task force that will engage on this issue. And the task force will be comprised of representatives from the Justice system, public safety, health, and I look forward to the recommendations that they provide in this regard.
The Honourable Member for Salaberry-sur-Roi. Mr. Speaker, legalizing marijuana was a major Liberal campaign promise, but the government has just assigned the file to the former Justice Minister, who previously stated her opposition to medicinal marijuana. In short, a former chief of police and a pot opponent are in charge of legalizing marijuana. It's like putting Colonel Saunders in charge of the hen house. Is the Prime Minister trying to torpedo his own initiative? The Honourable Minister of Justice.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Again, our government is committed to legalizing marijuana, strictly regulating marijuana, and doing this in a careful and orderly manner. I'm pleased to work with the Parliamentary Secretary. I'm pleased to work with the Ministers of Health and Public Safety. And we are very pleased to, in the coming weeks, announce a task force that will look into the work of the legalization process, what's required, what is necessary to do it in a careful way. And there will be perspectives from health, justice, law enforcement, and public safety.
The Honourable Member for North Okanagan, Shuswap.
Mr. Speaker, Canadians are disturbed with the appointment of the government House Leader as the Minister of Fisheries, Oceans and Canadian Coast Guard. The Ethics Commissioner has banned the House Leader from participating in any discussions or decision-making involving the Irving Group. The Irving Group is an important participant in the government's shipbuilding strategy for the Canadian Navy and the Canadian Coast Guard. Can the Prime Minister explain how the new Minister of Fisheries and Oceans can do this job without breaking the Ethics Commissioner ban?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Fisheries and Oceans.
Monsieur le Président, comme je l'ai dit hier à plusieurs...
Mr. Speaker, like I said yesterday repeatedly, the Minister was not involved in that and contacted the Conflict of Interest Commissioner, the Ethics Commissioner, to clear up the situation. A process will be put in place by the department to ensure that the minister is not put in a conflict of interest. As I said, the minister has already raised this question with the Ethics Commissioner and has complied with all her recommendations.
Mr. Speaker, Canadians deserve to know how this new Minister of Fisheries and Oceans can do his job effectively without breaking the Ethics Commissioner ban on communications with the Irving Group. The fact is that J.D. Irving has a position on the Minister's very own Advisory Committee on Atlantic Salmon. In light of the restrictions on the Minister, the Liberals owe Canadians a Minister of Fisheries and Oceans that can do the job. When will the Prime Minister respect the Commissioner's ban and appoint a Minister who can serve Canadians effectively?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Fisheries and Oceans. Mr. Speaker, as I said before and as I repeat, the Minister took the initiative to inform the Ethics Commissioner and to seek advice. The Commissioner gave some advice, and the Minister will follow all of the Ethics Commissioner's advice and to the letter. Once again, Mr. Speaker, our government and its ministers will uphold a high standard, and that is what the Minister will be doing in fulfilling his mandate. Thank you.
Mr. Speaker, Canadians are shocked at the Infrastructure Minister's extravagance. They don't understand why he would feel the need to spend nearly $1 million on TVs and toasters. While the Edmonton Minister was busy spending on his vain new offices, Liberals couldn't bring themselves to support Edmontonians looking for extended EI benefits. How can the Minister justify so much money on himself when thousands of Albertans are struggling?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Infrastructure. Mr. Speaker, I explained yesterday that before 2015, there was no minister, there was no deputy minister, and there was no office space dedicated to staff. Given the importance of this file, this government has arranged office space for the minister, the deputy minister, and for staff, for the whole team, and we followed all Treasury Board's guidelines in doing so, and will continue to do so, Mr. Speaker.
Riverbend.
Mr. Speaker, when I furnished my office, I took the opportunity to save money by outfitting it with furniture used from previous MPs. I currently have a TV from the 1990s, a file cabinet that has been used for generations, and clocks that remind me of my elementary school. My office is able to perform its functions without exorbitant spending. Why did the Edmonton Minister of Infrastructure need to spend almost $1 million on brand new TVs, file cabinets, and clocks to do his job?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
These are also very old, Mr. Speaker. Je l'ai dit et je le répète.
I've said it before and I'll repeat. There was no department. They had to create office space for the minister and the deputy minister. And why? Because we're putting forward a $120 billion infrastructure plan, the biggest ever in Canadian history. That is investing in infrastructure. That's investing in the future of our country.
Member for Essex.
Mr. Speaker, a new report is warning that the TPP will make our growing trade deficit with Asia even worse. It will hurt employment, kill growth in manufacturing and high tech, and damage our ability to diversify the Canadian economy. To make matters worse, the Canadian Nurses Association warned us at committee this week that it could even block us from ever implementing pharmacare. The evidence is clear. So will the minister finally stand up, put the interests of Canadians ahead of corporate rights, and reject the damaging TPP trade deal?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of International Trade.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I thank the honourable member for her question and for her work on the committee. We are aware of the more recent report. I was in committee this week when the nurses presented. So this is all information, Mr. Speaker, that we are taking in, and it will form part of the basis upon which we make our final decision whether or not to ratify the TPP. That's what we promised Canadians, Mr. Speaker. That is what we are doing through consultations, through gathering of information, through creating our own base of information, and that's going to form the basis for a good decision.
The Honourable Member for Abitibi, Temiskaming. Mr. Speaker, for months the Liberals have been telling us that they support the Canada Health Act, but they're sure not working hard to make sure it's applied. The community clinic in Pointe Saint-Charles recently filed a class action against the Government of Quebec and 3 private clinics for ancillary fees that were charged. And yet, according to the Canada Health Act, well, ancillary fees are illegal. So will the government finally end illegal fees that are being billed to Quebecers who use their healthcare system?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Health.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'd like to thank the honourable member for her question. Mr. Speaker, we fully support the principles of Canada Health Act, which are meant to ensure that all Canadians have reasonable access to medically necessary physician and hospital services based on need and not their ability to pay. And we're committed to working with our partners to strengthen our publicly funded universal healthcare system while at the same time upholding the principles of Canada Health Act. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Bravo.
The Honourable Member for Brampton East.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, Salim Al-Daradi has spent almost 2 years in jail in the United Arab Emirates before being acquitted of all charges on May 30th. He has since had to face additional obstacles, including not being immediately released from jail and facing a travel ban. We can all understand his family's eagerness to put this ordeal behind them and continue with their life. Will the government please update this House on the efforts to bring Salim Al-Daradi home? Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of International Affairs.
Mr. Speaker, I want to thank my friend for Brampton East for his championing of the interests of Canadians abroad. I'm happy to report that Salim Al-Daradi is on his way home. I thank his courageous family, his legal team, and our consular officials who worked tirelessly in getting him home. I also want to thank our Prime Minister, our Minister of Foreign Affairs, and my colleagues, members of this House, for raising his issue. Mr. Speaker, on behalf of the Government of Canada and all members of this House, I want to say to Mr. Al-Daradi, we look forward to welcoming you home.
The Honourable Member for Lakeland.
Mr. Speaker, junior exploration companies play a major role in Canada's mining sector. They need the predictability of a longer-term extension of the mineral exploration tax credit to finance their operations. It's critical to supporting our mining sector and to keeping investment in Canada. The 375,000 Canadians who work in the mining sector need certainty. Are the Liberals going to provide a predictable long-term extension of this tax credit and the flow-through shares provisions?
The Honourable Minister of Finance.
Mr. Speaker, I'd like to thank the member for her question and recognize that the mining sector has been under significant stress with changes in the global economy. We did take measures in Budget 2016 to extend this situation to help the mining sector. And we do remain focused on how we can work to ensure that our economy is successful so that this sector of our economy can indeed be successful. Additionally, we will be working on long-term opportunities for infrastructure and innovation that we hope will also help these companies to be more successful in the future. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Member for Prince George, Peace River, Northern Rockies.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. While the Liberals dither on its decision on Pacific Northwest LNG, communities in my riding suffer the consequences. In an area that once had a jobless rate so low it couldn't be reported, we now have the highest unemployment rate in British Columbia. This week, BC Premier Christy Clark has publicly questioned why the continued dithering. Mr. Speaker, this project has gone through a rigorous environmental assessment process already. When will the Liberals stop the dithering, do what is best for the people in northern British Columbia and the global environment, and approve BC LNG?
The Honourable Minister of the Environment.
We believe the environment and the economy go together.
We're overseeing a fair and thorough environmental assessment process that is grounded in science. There are significant concerns that have been raised with respect to this project, and we are looking into those concerns, and we're working with the proponent to address them, including impacts on salmon. We have said once we receive the necessary information, we will make a decision within 90 days. We look forward to working together to making this happen.
The honourable member for Caribou Prince George.
So hang in there. That's what we're hearing. Mr. Speaker, the 100-day deadline is fast approaching on the Liberals' promise to have a new softwood lumber deal. Yet the only thing we know from the past 100 days is we still don't have an agreement. Small producers don't have a voice. There's more uncertainty in an already volatile industry. Unfair tariffs and lawsuits for our small forestry producers are on the way. There will be job losses for the hundreds of thousands of Canadians employed by the forestry sector. Why are the Liberals failing to stand up for Canadians and doing nothing to bring home a new softwood lumber agreement?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of International Trade.
On the contrary, Mr. Speaker, we are doing a great deal to make sure that we get a good deal for Canada as regards softwood lumber. The government obviously recognizes the importance of the forestry industry to Canada. We understand the various dimensions and nuances of the industry across the country, province to province, big and small producers. Officials from the USTR have met with our team in Ottawa last week, and they will meet again. The minister has spoken to her counterpart, USTR Rep. Michael Froman. We've had meetings and contacts at the ambassadorial level. Mr. Speaker, we're going to get a deal done, and a good deal.
The honourable member for Kamloops, Thompson Caribou.
Mr. Speaker, the Liberals are a lot of talk, but they're no action. Friendship centres provide vital services to urban First Nations, including counselling and suicide prevention support programs. Our House of Commons Committee was told yesterday that promised base funding is delayed, facing layer after layer of new Liberal red tape. 2 months, no money, laying off staff, and shrinking necessary programs. What's the holdup? Why is funding for vital, life-changing, life-saving programs been delayed?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Government House Leader.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Speaker. What we can be very clear on is that this government has made a sincere, genuine commitment to establishing a relationship with our Indigenous people. We recognize, Mr. Speaker, that there are many things in which the government needs to be able to look at, and one of the issues before us is in regards to our young people, and the friendship centres do play a significant role. I appreciate the question from the member.
The honourable member for Kootenay, Columbia.
Mr. Speaker, last week, UNESCO's World Heritage Committee called on Canada to better protect Newfoundland's Gros Morne National Park from industrial development if it is going to keep its World Heritage Site designation. They recommended a buffer zone, including for oil and gas. Despite government claims there are existing protections, we have routinely seen adjacent industrial activity impact the ecological integrity of our parks. Gros Morne is a unique area, a place Canada should be proudly protecting on behalf of Canadians and the global community. Will the government now agree to put a buffer zone in place?
The Honourable Minister of the Environment.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. We believe in the ecological integrity of our national parks. We are committed to maintaining the ecological integrity of our national parks. That applies to all parks, including Gros Morne National Park. We look forward to working together with the member opposite to ensure that we do maintain the ecological integrity.
The honourable member for Vancouver Kingsway.
Mr. Speaker, the crisis in affordable housing in Vancouver has reached the boiling point. Young people can't afford to buy or rent a home in the city they grew up in, and they're being forced to leave. Employers can't attract and retain employees. With the average house price now well over $2 million, middle-class families are priced out of the market altogether. Now, Liberals promised to address this crisis, but so far they've done absolutely nothing. Where is the government's plan to make housing more affordable in Vancouver?
The Honourable Minister of Finance.
Mr. Speaker, I'd like to start by saying that, in fact, the idea that we have done absolutely nothing is not correct. There's a number of things that we have done. Within 1 month of coming into office, we changed the rules around down payments for people on homes at the higher end, and that would impact, in particular, pockets of risk in the housing market in Toronto and Vancouver. In our budget, we put money into our budget to examine the impact of foreign buyers into the Canadian housing market. Mr. Speaker, we recognize that this is a critically important issue. I want to thank the member for bringing it up. We remain focused on the housing market because we know how important housing is to Canadian families, for whom, for most, it's the most important asset they own.
The honourable member for Flamborough-Glanbrook.
Mr. Speaker, for decades, the Baha'i community has been the most persecuted peoples in Iran, but in the past few weeks, the ruling mullahs have orchestrated an increasingly hostile and systematic attack on Baha'i Iranians. The situation is surely grim for the Baha'i. The eyes of the world are on Iran, and much of the international community is speaking out and putting the appropriate pressure on Iran. Why have the Liberals been so silent in denouncing the latest wave of hatred? Why aren't they speaking out and pressuring the Iranian regime to stop the attack on the Baha'i people?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Foreign Affairs.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. We've repeated our commitment to re-engage with Iran in a step-by-step and cautious manner. Canada's severing of ties with Iran had no positive consequences for anyone, not for Canadians, not for the people of Iran, not for our allies like Israel, and not for global security. It was fortunate, for instance, at the end of the 1970s that we had a Canadian embassy in Tehran when it was time to help U.S. hostages. Our allies are also re-engaging with Iran, most recently a European Union delegation. The Conservatives seem to want Canada to stand alone, which helps no one. Thank you.
The honourable member for Sherwood Parks, Fort Saskatchewan.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And the situation facing China's religious minorities is not improving either. Tibetan Buddhists engaged in a peaceful struggle for autonomy within the framework of the Chinese Constitution are denied many of their basic human rights. Many Uyghur Muslims will likely be denied the right to fast during Ramadan this year. Falun Gong practitioners and Christians also face denial of their basic rights. Were any of these specific issues raised during the foreign minister's visit to Canada?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. We believe that engaging with China in a comprehensive way is the best option. We have regular high-level interactions with China on a range of issues that allow us to continue to be frank and honest on conversations such as human rights and freedom of the press. Canada consistently raises human rights concerns with the Chinese government, as the Minister of Foreign Affairs did this week with the Chinese Foreign Minister.
The honourable member for Cypress Hills Grasslands.
Well, Mr. Speaker, the Chinese government has its way with this Liberal government. It tells our Prime Minister when he can meet with them. It berates Canadians while the Foreign Affairs Minister stands meekly off to the side. Right. Mr. Speaker, if the Liberals want to stand up for Canadians, they could start with Kevin and Julia Garrett. After almost 2 years of being threatened, harassed, and living under phony charges, it's time for them to be freed. When will the Liberals tell the Chinese government to quit playing games with the lives of Kevin and Julia Garrett and bring them home?
Honorary Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Foreign Affairs.
Mr. Speaker, our government is very concerned about the well-being of the Garrett family. I encourage the honourable members not to play politics with issues of concerns of Canadians who are stuck abroad. Our government continues to raise this issue at the highest levels with the Chinese officials, and we will persist and we will not stop until the Garretts return home.
I just want to remind the honourable members that we're really doing well up until that question, so if you could just kind of keep it down a bit. The honourable member for Charleswood St. James, Assiniboia Headingley.
Mr. Speaker, Budget 2016 contained the most innovative development of social policy in a generation, the Canada Child Benefit. With checks set to start flowing to hardworking Canadian families next month, the Parliamentary Budget Officer has completed an independent review of our benefit. Would the Minister of Finance please share with this House the results of that review? Good question.
The Honourable Minister of Finance.
Mr. Speaker, I'd like to thank the member from Charleswood St. James, Assiniboia Headingley for his question. And I'd like to start as well by recognizing the important work that the Parliamentary Budget Office does. We were so pleased to see that their report confirmed that millions of Canadians will be helped through the Canada Child Benefit, which was implemented in Budget 2016. They've said that's the case. We know that 300,000 children will be lifted out of poverty. 9 out of 10 families with children will be better off. The new Canada Child Benefit is going to make a real and measurable difference in the lives of so many Canadians, and we're very pleased to have that as part of Budget 2016.
The Honourable Member for Beauport, Côte-de-Beaupré, Île-d'Orléans, Charlevoix. Mr. Speaker, since this government has taken power, we've heard nothing about official languages. They're no longer in the minister's title, and no one in the government seems to want to deal with this file. Mr. Speaker, I'd like to know if there's a pilot in the plane of official languages, or will the government continue to simply abandon this issue? The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Canadian Heritage. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I'd like to thank my honourable colleague for her question. It must be made very clear that this government is working very hard on official languages with a pan-governmental approach. Not only do we have a pilot, we have many pilots in the plane, because this is a pan-governmental approach that we're taking that represents Canadians from sea to sea to sea to defend the rights and and we're taking our responsibility as a government, and will continue to do so. The honourable member for Laurentides-Labelle. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Canadians with functional limitations face daily challenges that prevent them from participating fully in their communities and workplaces. We have a duty to reduce obstacles to accessibility and ensure equal access and equal chances for all. Everyone deserves to be able to participate fully and equally. Can the Minister please inform this House of the measures put in place to reduce obstacles to accessibility? Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Minister for, I'm sorry, I'm kind of lost here, Sports and Persons with Disabilities.
Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I would also like to thank my honourable colleague from Laurentides-Labelle for his question. Earlier this week, I invited businesses and community organizations to prevent requests for funding under the 2016 Accessibility Fund, which will receive an extra $4 million after Budget 2016. This funding plays an important role by allowing or ensuring that all Canadians be able to fully participate in their workplaces and communities. Thank you.
Well, member for Carleton.
Mr. Speaker, the Liberal member for Ottawa Centre has slammed on the brakes for a replacement of the 92-year-old Ottawa Hospital in her own riding. She does not like the location that the hospital's expert panel selected after it thoroughly studied 12 possible sites. If she has a better site in mind, or if the NCC is considering different locations, they should know by now. After all, it's been 6 months. Further, they should tell the residents of her community and mine what those alternative sites are. Why won't they?
The Honourable Member for Canadian Heritage.
Mr. Speaker, I thank the honourable colleague opposite for the question. Our government understands emphatically the need for state-of-the-art hospital in downtown Ottawa, and we support that project. For this reason, the Minister of Heritage has asked the National Capital Commission to review possible sites for the Ottawa Hospital Civic Campus through a rigorous and transparent process in order to provide the government with a recommendation. It is important to note, Mr. Speaker, that the Member of Parliament for Ottawa Centre also supports this project, and she and we support a transparent and open process so that a civic hospital in Ottawa may be built.
The Honourable Member for Pierre Boucher, Les Patriotes Verchères. Mr. Speaker, our constituents have been worried since Lac Mégantic. In the recent campaign, Sécurité Ferroviaire Rive-Sud launched a petition to end oil-by-rail transport between Saint-Lambert and Sorel until the railway is moved. It was signed by thousands of citizens, including myself, the Green candidate, and the Liberal candidate. Now we've learned that it was quickly tabled, quietly, by the Liberal member for Montreal in this House on April 19th, and since then, crickets. Will the Liberals respect this commitment, or will we have to wait for Quebec to be a sovereign country for it to be respected? The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary for Infrastructure. Well, as I said, Mr. Speaker, the government recognizes the importance of ensuring the safety of our rail transport system, and that is why we have made major investments, $143 million, to improve rail safety and the transport of dangerous goods, Mr. Speaker. Obviously, we have consulted since Lac Mégantic, and there are studies that are being undertaken, and we will make decisions that take into account the safety of Canadians. The Honourable Member for Repentigny. Mr. Speaker, the UN has just put Saudi Arabia on the blacklist of countries that violate the rights of children in conflict situations. These are groups and countries that subject children to murder, sexual violence, and mutilation, and who bomb schools and hospitals. We've had enough of the "it's just business" excuses and the insignificant committee proposals. When will the minister finally do something concrete, stand up and end the sale of arms to Saudi Arabia?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary for the Minister of Foreign Affairs.
Canadian labs have been sold to Saudi Arabia for over 20 years, and all of our checks to date indicate that they have not been used inappropriately. The Minister of Foreign Affairs retains the power to revoke at any time the export permit should the assessment change. As you know, Canada has some of the strongest export controls in the world. A big part of that is working diligently to accede to the Arms Trade Treaty, and we will improve export controls process going forward with the greatest rigor and increased transparency. Thank you.
The Honourable Member for Joliette. Mr. Speaker, in business, inaction is always the worst choice. The government's inaction on Bombardier sends a clear signal to the business sector. Ottawa is disavowing this great Quebec company. That means invest in Boeing, invest in Airbus, because those businesses are supported by their countries, but don't invest in Bombardier. In Quebec, even our champions of non-assertion are fed up with government inaction. People like Philippe Couillard, Carlos Letao, and Jean Charest. So I want to know, how long will the government continue to do nothing for Bombardier? A week, a month, a year, 4 years? Forever?
The Honourable Minister of Innovation.
Mr. Speaker, I disagree with my colleague because I understand and our government understands the importance of this business, and that is why we are working with Bombardier, and I'm very confident that we will find a solution that is good for the business, for the sector, and for all Canadians. Thank you.
That terminates question period. Thank you very much for all of you respecting my hearing. We have a point of order for the member for Haliburton, Kawartha Lakes, Rock.
Mr. Speaker, it happened yesterday, but at least twice today, the Parliamentary Secretary for Infrastructure stood and claimed there was no Minister of Infrastructure in the previous Parliament. Mr. Speaker, I would like to let the Parliamentary Secretary know that the member from Lac-Saint-Jean was the Minister of Infrastructure in the last Parliament.
Denny LaBelle was his name.
Which then refutes their claim that they had to spend $1 million for...
I believe that's turning into debate right now, and but thank you. Very good. Yes, another point of order. The honourable member for Sherwood Park, Fort Saskatchewan.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister for Democratic Reform said that no amendments were accepted to the Fair Elections Act. Now, he knows that giving false information to the House is a serious matter. In fact, over 40 amendments were accepted to the Fair Elections Act. So I would appreciate it if the Parliamentary Secretary might want to take the opportunity to just correct the record on that point.
I believe that's getting into debate as well, but very good. Another point of order, the honourable member for Flamborough-Glanbrook.
I think you'd find the chamber distressed today that we didn't hear a report on Free the Beer. And I think if you seek it, you find unanimous consent to hear a report on Free the Beer so that we can have great interprovincial trade and make sure that all Canadians have access to their beer.
Does the honourable member have the unanimous consent of the House to move the motion? Agreed? I don't believe we have unanimous consent. Routine proceedings, tabling of documents. The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Leader of the House, the Government House Leader.
Yes, thank you. Under tabling of documents, I believe, Mr. Speaker, pursuant to Standing Order 36(8), I have the honour to table in both official languages the government's responses to 5 petitions.
Introduction of government bills. Statements by ministers. Reports from interparliamentary delegations. Presenting reports from committees. The honourable member for Vancouver Centre.
Speaker, I have the honour to present in both official languages the second report of the Standing Committee on Canadian Heritage in relation to Bill C-210, an act to amend the national anthem, Gender. The committee has studied the bill and has decided to report the bill back to the House without amendment.
Thank you. Now, introduction of private members' bills. Mr. Davies, seconded by Ms. Ramsey, moves for leave to introduce a bill entitled An Act to Amend the Excise Tax Act and the Income Tax Act, Extra Energy Efficiency Products. This motion is deemed adopted. The honourable member for Vancouver Kingsway. Yeah, please.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'd like to thank the great member for Essex for seconding this bill. Mr. Speaker, June 5, in just 2 days, is World Environment Day, and I'm honoured to stand in the House today and introduce a suite of 3 environmental bills that will help Canada make progress in this important area. This is the first of them. This enactment promotes greater energy efficiency among Canadian households by removing the sales tax on consumers and businesses for the purchase of eligible energy-efficient products, and by providing a tax credit under the Income Tax Act for the purchase of these products. The bill would provide financial incentives for individual families to lower their carbon footprint by reducing their energy consumption and use. The existing Energy Star program helps consumers make informed choices by highlighting energy-efficient products, but this bill would go one step further by exempting such products from the GST or HST. I urge all members to support it and help save our environment.
Mr. Davies, seconded by Ms. Ramsey, moves that the bill be now read a first time and be printed. This motion is deemed adopted.
First reading of this bill, première lecture de ce projet de loi.
When shall the bill be read a second time? At the next sitting of the House. Mr. Davies, seconded by Ms. Ramsey, moves for leave to introduce a bill entitled An Act to Amend the Canadian Environmental Protection Act, 1999, Electronic Products Recycling Program. This motion is deemed adopted. The honourable member for Vancouver Kingsway.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Once again, I'd like to thank the honourable member from Essex for seconding this bill. With June 5 coming up being World Environment Day, it's important that this chamber start moving to bring in legislation that will help Canada meet our global responsibilities to deal with climate change. And this bill would amend the Canadian Environmental Protection Act to require that a recycling program be put in place for electronic products that contain a substance that is specified on the list of toxic substances in Schedule 1. Madam Speaker, we all know that electronic products are increasingly common. I think there's no Canadian household that doesn't have a lot of them, and they contain toxic substances that we should be proactive in ensuring that these do not go into our environment. And this act would work to create a national recycling program to divert those products from landfills and make sure that we can help preserve our earth for future generations. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Mr. Davies, seconded by Ms. Ramsey, moves that the bill be now read a first time and be printed. This motion is deemed adopted.
Première lecture de ce projet de loi, first reading of this bill.
When shall the bill be read a second time? At the next sitting of the House. Introduction of private members' bills. Mr. Davies, seconded by Ms. Ramsey, moves for leave to introduce a bill entitled An Act Respecting a National Strategy for the Development of Renewable Energy Resources. This motion is also deemed adopted. The honourable member for Vancouver Kingsway.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. And once again, it gives me a chance to highlight and thank the hardworking and excellent member from Essex for seconding this bill. Madam Speaker, this enactment requires the Minister of Natural Resources, in consultation with the provincial and territorial ministers responsible for energy, to develop and make public a national strategy for increasing the proportion of electricity generated from renewable energy sources in Canada to 90% as soon as possible, but no later than December 31, 2030. It calls on the government to develop a national strategy to ensure that Canada ambitiously transitions its energy production towards renewable sources such as solar, wind, or biomass. Madam Speaker, I urge all members of this House to do their part in 2016 to ensure that our children and their children and generations to come can ensure that they have a clean environment with energy generated from renewable and sustainable sources. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Mr. Davies, seconded by Ms. Ramsey, moves that the bill be now read a first time and be printed. The motion is deemed adopted.
First reading of this bill, première lecture de ce projet de loi.
When shall the bill be read a second time? At the next sitting of the House. Introduction and first reading of private members' bills. Mr. Julian, seconded by Mr. Davies, moves for leave to introduce a bill entitled An Act to Provide for the Development of National Standards for the Transport of Currency and Valuables by Armored Car. This motion is deemed adopted. The Honourable Member for New Westminster, Burnaby.
Merci beaucoup, Madame la Présidente. Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. I wish to thank my very hard-working colleague from Vancouver Kingsway and salute all the people who transport our valuables every day throughout the country. As you know, Madam Speaker, there is no system of national standards for the transportation of valuables. It requires equipment, training, and a certain size of team, and health and safety measures. It seems like common sense to have national standards across the country for the health and safety of the public. We hope we will get to the support of all members in this House for this bill.
To shout out to the unionized workers of Unifor that transport every day our valuables right across the country by armored car. But as you know, Madam Speaker, there is simply not in place the kind of national standards we need for training, for equipment, for crew size, and also for health and safety regulations right across the country. That's a concern for the employees, a concern for the public as well. So I hope that members from both sides of this House will support this important legislation to put in place these national standards. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Monsieur Julien, appuyé par
Mr. Julian, seconded by Mr. Davies, moves that this bill be now read a first time and be printed. This motion is deemed adopted.
First reading of this bill, première lecture de ce projet de loi.
When shall the bill be read a second time? At the next sitting of the House.
First reading of Senate bills. Motions. Presenting petitions. The Honourable Member for Prince George, Peace River, Northern Rockies.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I have a petition here today signed by 4,355 individuals, Canadian citizens, about property rights. It was presented by Sean Bevins, and I just wanted to give him credit for the work he's put into this. We, the undersigned citizens of Canada, call upon the House of Commons in Parliament to amend Section 7 of the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms to include property rights. We propose that Section 7 be amended to read, everyone has the right to life, liberty, security of the person and enjoyment of the property, and the right not to be deprived thereof, except in accordance with the principles of fundamental justice. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Présentation de pétition.
Presenting petitions.
Member for Fort McMurray, Cold Lake.
Madam Speaker, I have 3 petitions to call upon the House of Commons to pass legislation which would recognize preborn children as separate victims when they are injured or killed during a commission of an offence against their mother, allowing 2 charges to be laid against the offender instead of just 1. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Presenting petitions. Présentation de pétition. The Honourable Member for Peace River, Westlock.
I have a petition here from over 100 constituents of the Toronto area and Windsor, and they are asking for there to be a review of the online access to online violent sexual material, and they would like to see the Health Committee to study this. So I'd like to present this petition. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Présentation de pétition. Presenting petitions. The Honourable Member for Flamborough-Glanbrook.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I have 2 separate petitions on 2 different subjects. One calls on the Government of Canada to maintain the listing of the Islamic Republic of Iran as a state supporter of terrorism pursuant to Section 6.1 of the State Immunity Act for as long as the Iranian regime continues to sponsor terrorism. And then, Madam Speaker, I have another very large petition that calls on Parliament and government to pass a resolution to establish measures to stop the Chinese Communist regime's crime of systematically murdering Falun Gong practitioners for their organs, amend Canadian legislation to combat forced organ harvesting, and publicly call for an end to the persecution of Falun Gong in China.
Présentation de pétitions. Presenting petitions, the l'honorable député.
The honourable member for Hochelaga. Thank you, Madam Speaker. I have 100 signatures here from people from my riding of Hochelaga and from other parts of Montreal, asking the government to abolish once and for all the Senate, since it is made of unelected persons who have no accountability. Thank you.
Présentation de pétitions. Presenting petitions, the honourable member for Cariboo Prince George.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I have with me 2 petitions from the good people of Cariboo Prince George and indeed all across Canada. Petition to recognize preborn children as separate victims when harmed or killed during criminal attacks against their mothers. Thank you.
Questions and comments, questions et commentaires. Presenting petitions, présentation de pétitions. I was on a roll there for a minute. The honourable member for Yorkton Melville.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. People across Canada hear that all of the members in this House have the backs of women and believe in their rights. And more petitions continue to come to this House from those people calling on this government to realize that forcing upon a pregnant woman the death or injury of her preborn child is a violation of a woman's right to protect and give life to her child.
Présentation de pétitions. Presenting petitions, the honourable member for Edmonton West.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I have a petition here to submit, signed by several hundred members or residents of the Edmonton area, calling on the House to pass legislation which would recognize preborn children as separate victims when they are injured or killed during the commission of an offence against their mothers. Thank you.
Presenting petitions. Présentation de pétitions. Questions on the order paper. The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Leader of the Government in the House of Commons.
Yes, thank you, Madam Speaker. The following questions will be answered today. Questions -114, questions 116, and question 117. And furthermore, if I may, Madam Speaker, if questions number Q107 to Q109, Q112, and Q115 could be made orders for return, these returns would be tabled immediately.
Plaît-il à la Chambre?
Is it the pleasure of the House for the questions to be made orders for return and for those returns to be tabled immediately? Agreed? Agreed and so ordered.
L'Honorable Secretary.
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Government.
Finally, I would ask that the remaining questions be allowed to stand at this time.
D'accord?
Agreed? Agreed.
Ordre du jour. Orders of the...
Orders of the day.
Ordre émanant du gouvernement, projet de loi émanant du gouvernement.
Government orders, government bills, commons. Resuming debate at third reading, Bill C6, an act to amend the Citizenship Act.
Ms. McKenna moves that Bill C6, an act to amend the Citizenship Act and to make consequential amendments to another act, be now read a third time and do passed. Debate. The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Immigration, Refugees and Citizenship.
Merci, Madame la Présidente.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I'm pleased to take the floor today in support of Bill C6, an act to amend the Citizenship Act. I'd like to begin with a list, Madam Speaker.
Argentina, China, Germany, Grenada, Haiti, India, Iran, Lebanon, Pakistan, Poland, Portugal, Saudi Arabia, Scotland, Somalia, South Africa, Switzerland, Tanzania, Trinidad, Uganda, the United Kingdom, and the United States. What do these countries have in common, Madam Speaker? They're all nations from where members of this House hail. 41 members of this chamber, spanning 4 different parties, are citizens of Canada who were born outside of this country. I am one of that group of 41 members, Madam Speaker. I was born in Uganda and arrived here as a young refugee in 1972. This bill, Bill C-6, says to me and 40 of my fellow MPs that our citizenship is no different than that of our Canadian-born colleagues. In fact, Bill C-6 says to millions of Canadians who naturalized here after arriving from overseas that their citizenship has the same value and is accorded the same respect as the citizenship of those born in this country. It tells them that a Canadian is a Canadian is a Canadian. Allow me to explain, Madam Speaker. Bill C-6 reverses the divisive legacy of legislation enacted by the previous government. Under what was then called Bill C-24, the previous government enacted legislation that allowed persons born abroad to be stripped of their citizenship on the basis of acts against the national interest, treason, spying, terrorism. But this applied only to those born abroad. So if someone, Madam Speaker, was born in Canada and committed the exact same criminal act against the national interest, their citizenship could not be stripped. Canadian-born individuals would be dealt with by the criminal justice system alone, whereas foreign-born Canadians were subject to a double penalty: punishment under the criminal justice system, together with revocation of their citizenship under the Citizenship Act. The old legislation enacted by the previous government was wrong, Madam Speaker, for two reasons. First, because it was unfair and unequal. We heard about the unfairness of the old Conservative legislation from strong immigration advocates, like Legal Aid Ontario's Refugee Law Office and Romero House in my riding of Parkdale High Park. The inequality of the old legislation was laid bare by the litigation it caused, Madam Speaker. The BC Civil Liberties Association and the Canadian Association of Refugee Lawyers brought a charter challenge to Bill C-24, contending it created two tiers of citizenship. Second, and more importantly, the old Bill C-24 was flawed, Madam Speaker, because it sent the wrong message to newcomers. People like me, Madam Speaker, who fled their homelands to make a fresh start in Canada, are thankful for the opportunity to be here, but ultimately we all seek the same thing: full and final integration. The previous government's Bill C-24 failed such Canadians precisely because it rendered them more vulnerable. It told them that they are citizens, but citizens with an asterisk, Madam Speaker. By retracting the odious legislation the previous government passed, what we are doing is saying to me and millions of other Canadians who came here from other countries that the politics of division are over, that you do indeed belong. Mais c'est assez.
But enough about the old legislation, Mr. Speaker. I want to address the merits of Bill C-6.
C-6 meets what we like to call the triple E test. It is evidence-based, it makes economic sense, and the bill is ethically sound. Allow me to address each of these points in turn. First point, Madam Speaker, Bill C-6 is evidence-based. Our government campaigned on a commitment to return to evidence-based policy, and that is precisely what Bill C-6 represents. Studies demonstrate that facilitating a path to not only obtaining but maintaining citizenship promotes the better integration of newcomers and their sense of belonging. This point has been reinforced to me time and time again by settlement and community groups doing important work in Parkdale High Park, such as Ukrainian Canadian Social Services, such as the Four Villages Community Health Centre, such as the Canadian Ukrainian Immigrant Aid Society and the Canadian Polish Congress. Point two, Madam Speaker, Bill C-6 is good economics. These very same studies show that this bill will have clear economic benefits for Canada. Immigrants who are given a path to permanence through citizenship have higher educational and economic outcomes. This point has also been communicated to me in my riding by terrific organizations on the front lines of settling newcomers in Toronto, like Parkdale Intercultural Association, the Parkdale Community Recreation Centre, CultureLink, the Parkdale Community Health Centre, and Polycultural Immigrant and Community Services. Madam Speaker, Bill C-6 is also ethically sound. Until the previous government's decision to enact the old Bill C-24, we never had two tiers of citizenship in this country. It is not morally justifiable to divide citizens among those fortunate enough to be born here versus those who naturalize after arriving from overseas. Mais notre nouveau projet de loi fait beaucoup.
But our new bill does much more than eliminate the two tiers of citizenship created by the Conservatives. Madam Speaker, as I've indicated, Bill C-6 also facilitates obtaining citizenship in several important ways, which I'd like to turn to now.
The barriers to citizenship which will be removed by this bill are many. I propose to address 4, Madam Speaker. First relates to the length of time required to qualify for citizenship. Our legislation will require an applicant to be present in Canada for 3 years over a 5-year time span, rather than the current 4-year requirement over a 6-year time span. So this bill will expand the pool of potential citizens and allow them to apply earlier. More specifically, Madam Speaker, Bill C-6 is more flexible. It doesn't require a person to be in Canada for at least 183 days per year over each eligible year. Instead, one needs simply to be here for 1,095 days over a 5-year period. What does that mean, Madam Speaker? It means flexibility. If one's job takes you overseas for extended periods, this does not make you automatically ineligible for citizenship. Second, Madam Speaker, Bill C-6 restores the knowledge and language testing requirement to the previous age range. The previous government passed legislation indicating that testing would be required for any applicant age 14 to age 64. We're restoring that age range back to the previous norm, which was age 18 to 54, Madam Speaker. This change will improve access to citizenship for the very young and for those 55 and over, thereby help speeding up their formal integration. Third, the intent to reside provision is being removed. Bill C-6 will no longer make it a requirement to declare your intent to reside in Canada before becoming a citizen. That requirement was unmerited. Madam Speaker, all Canadians have mobility rights. More importantly, the old requirement created a great deal of confusion. Over 200 applications were returned to individuals who failed to complete the intent to reside provision portion of the application because they didn't understand it. They feared their citizenship could be revoked if they moved abroad. Madam Speaker, it cannot. Fourth, and perhaps most importantly, Bill C-6 will allow time spent in Canada prior to becoming a permanent resident to count towards one's 3-year requirement to become a citizen. This provision allows for a 50% credit for time spent in Canada prior to becoming a permanent resident, up to a maximum credit of 1 year. Who will this help, Madam Speaker? It will help temporary foreign workers. It will help international students. It will help protected persons by speeding all of these groups on their path towards citizenship. This makes sense, Madam Speaker. These people have already spent time here, they've already worked and studied here, they've already built an attachment to Canada. I turn now to one of the criticisms we've heard about this bill. Safety, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, allow me to be crystal clear. Bill C-6 does not imperil the safety of Canadians. Our government's commitment to safety is unwavering. We have a place for terrorists, Madam Speaker. It's called jail. We have a place to prosecute terrorists, Madam Speaker. That's called the criminal justice system. When you commit a crime in Canada, you are prosecuted by the criminal justice system. We don't need a Citizenship Act tool to address a criminal code problem. But there's also a broader, more philosophical underpinning to Bill C-6, Madam Speaker. When you boost integration and you put in place mechanisms for success, you strengthen ties and loyalty to this country. This doesn't threaten our safety, Madam Speaker. It is part of a host of initiatives, such as our response to the Syrian refugee crisis, which demonstrates Canada's openness, our inclusivity, and our compassion. These efforts counter radicalization and reduce threats to our safety. In fact, Madam Speaker, I would say we do this better than any country in the world, and I'm proud to be part of a government that is restoring this reputation both here and abroad. Madam Speaker, il est également important de comprendre.
Madam Speaker, it's also important to understand that Bill C-6 is not an outright rejection of all aspects of its predecessor, Bill C-24, enacted by the previous government.
C-24 have we decided to keep. There are provisions we've kept, Madam Speaker, but there are also provisions we've actually improved. For instance, we've kept the physical presence requirement rather than the term residence because physical presence is easier to verify. Revoking citizenship based on fraud and misrepresentation has existed since 1947, and this power remains in Bill C-6. Bill C-24, passed by the previous government, facilitated fraud detection, which is very important, and we've kept provisions that make this possible, as well as provisions that permit government to strip people of citizenship quickly when they have committed fraud. But more importantly, we've also enhanced some of these provisions, Madam Speaker. For example, we've added a section that allows us to seize documents used in the commission of fraud. Finally, we have also committed to implementing all of the Auditor General's recommendations regarding preventing citizenship fraud. Madam Speaker, another improvement relates to conditional sentence orders. If convicted, time served in a community on a conditional sentence order can no longer count towards your 3-year residence requirement. And if one is on a conditional sentence order, one cannot take the oath of citizenship. Again, improvements on the predecessor legislation. Madam Speaker, let's talk about committee. The bill has just returned from the Standing Committee on Immigration. We are also a government that believes in working across the aisles. So when at committee, amendments that were proposed that made sense, that conformed with the policy direction that we're pursuing with this legislation, that improved this bill, we didn't hesitate to accept those amendments, Madam Speaker. Those amendments help us create a more diverse and inclusive Canada. One of the amendments added by the NDP added the term statelessness as a ground on which citizenship may be granted at the discretion of the minister. Another NDP amendment requires the minister to consider reasonable measures to accommodate the needs of citizenship applicants with disabilities. Those are amendments proposed by the opposition, which we accepted on their merit, and we welcome them as part of this new bill. Madam Speaker, in conclusion, I want to return in my remarks to where I began. When I provided you a list of the 22 different nations that make up the homelands of members of this House, Madam Speaker, it was simply to provide you with a snapshot of the diversity of this chamber. But this chamber serves as a proxy for this country, a country that is made up of literally millions of individuals whose provenance extends to every corner of the globe. To that diverse group, Madam Speaker, Bill C-6 says your citizenship is no less valuable, no less respected than that of a citizen born in this country. But I believe one of the lasting attributes of this bill is one that has actually been rarely discussed. In facilitating pathways to citizenship, Bill C-6 also facilitates pathways to participation. Only citizens can cast votes in this country, Madam Speaker. Only citizens can stand for election to this chamber. By breaking down barriers to citizenship and putting in their place opportunities to obtain and retain citizenship, Bill C-6 promotes the highest level of engagement possible, engagement in our democratic process. Madam Speaker, the ultimate job of any government, regardless of its political stripe, is to promote an engaged citizenry. That is precisely what Bill C-6 will do. I'm proud to endorse this bill as Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Immigration, Refugees and Citizenship, and I urge all of my colleagues to do the same. Merci beaucoup.
Questions and comments? Questions et commentaires. The honourable member for Edmonton Manning.
Madam Speaker, and congratulations to member opposite. I'm glad he mentioned that he is among the 41 member of Parliament in this House that from the first immigration set. I'm one of them too. And one thing I like to highlight is this. We succeed in this place, we succeed in Canada and being able to come to Canadian Parliament and become parliamentarians just because we consider Canada a home. And just because of that, we've succeeded. If someone's considering Canada a target of terrorism, does not deserve Canadian citizenship, does not deserve to be Canadians. Our Canadian citizenship has a huge value, has the highest value of integrity, of honor to have it. If someone wants to use it for to go across the world to have access to all other places in the world just because he's Canadian citizen, does not deserve to be Canadian citizen. If someone doesn't want to commit to live in Canada, does not deserve to be in Canada. I like to remind also the honourable member of the 1947 Immigration Act, which is at that time was presented and was implemented and adopted by a Liberal government. Bill C-24 is nothing but a part of that, or a similar act to the 1947 Immigration Act that at that time the Liberal government have adopted and introduced. So I'm saying this, whether 3 to 5 years or 4 to 6 years, don't the members opposite agree that Canadian citizens deserve to be worthwhile for someone to take it or not?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
Madam Speaker, I thank my honourable colleague for his question, and I applaud the diversity of this chamber that is represented by all parties in this House. It is a testament to the kind of electoral system and the kind of parliament we have created here. In response to some of the comments raised by the honourable member, I would reiterate a couple of things, because sometimes this nuance gets lost in the discussion. If one is applying for citizenship and commits a criminal code offence, including a terrorist offence, one is prevented from accessing citizenship in this country. That's the law in Canada. That has always been the law in Canada. The Liberals believe in that law. The Conservatives believe in that law. The difference is that once one has already obtained citizenship, What was added by the Conservative government, which we fundamentally and ideologically disagree with, is that once one is here and is a citizen here, if one had naturalized, one was given an extra penalty after the acts of commission of crimes against the national interest. We believe that the criminal code and the criminal justice system can address terrorism and crimes against the national interest, and that's the vehicle for addressing those crimes. That's a fundamental difference which we don't agree on, and that's what this bill represents. But also importantly is that there is a very fundamental distinction between the 1947 Citizenship Act and what was enacted under Bill C-24 by the Conservatives. And that difference is this. Until C-24, there was only one means of revoking citizenship, and that was based on fraud. Sometimes the fraud was less dramatic. Sometimes it included people who pretended they weren't war criminals in World War II. We believe that is the only basis for revoking citizenship, and that's what this bill restores. Thank you.
Questions and comments? Questions et commentaires. The honourable member for New Westminster, Burnaby.
Thanks very much, Madam Speaker. I commend the Parliamentary Secretary for his speech on this important bill. And I represent the riding that is the most diverse in the entire country. Very proud to represent New Westminster Burnaby. There are over 100 languages spoken in that small riding, and it is really at the center of where new Canadians come from the four corners of the world. There was a very strong reaction when the previous Conservative government established two-tier citizenship, and understandably, what those new Canadians felt is that essentially the government was saying that there'll never be full Canadians in the way that somebody who was born in Canada is. And so I wanted to ask the Parliamentary Secretary what the reaction was in his community. How did people speak out against this legislation? And why it is so important to actually move forward to establish a common citizenship for all Canadians.
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Immigration, Refugees and Citizenship.
Thank you, and I thank the member opposite for his question and for all of his advocacy on behalf of the various diverse constituents in his riding. The reaction in my riding is very similar to reactions that we heard from ridings around the country, be they urban or rural. And the reaction was simply that people who were not born here, who naturalized here or were on the path to naturalization, felt disserved and underserved by the previous legislation. They felt stigmatized, they felt vulnerable, they felt that they were being valued less. That's a very strong statement, but that's a statement that I heard again and again and again on the campaign trail, and I heard it in my capacity as a human rights lawyer prior to becoming an elected representative of this House. That's what we're trying to cure by enacting legislation of this type. It's not about pithy phrases, it's not about cliches on the campaign trail. Madam Speaker, what it's about is about giving people a sense of value, that they can vote, they can sit in this House, they can participate in the electoral process, they can feel that their citizenship, regardless of where they were born, is valued the same as anyone else who's been here for multiple generations. That's what we're trying to do with this bill. Thank you.
Questions and comments? Questions et commentaires. The honourable member for York Centre.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Just like the member opposite, I too am an immigrant to this country, and I thank the honourable member for highlighting Scotland as one of the destinations that members of this Parliament have come from. My riding of York Centre is a wonderfully diverse riding. So many immigrants adding their voices and adding value to Canadian society each and every day. And I heard concerns, not just about two-tiered citizenship, but also about things like language testing requirements and residency requirements. And I'm just wondering if the Parliamentary Secretary can inform us again of the changes that are going to be made under this Act.
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
Thank you, and I appreciate the question from my colleague and his own background as a member who'd come from the United Kingdom, specifically from Scotland. And he represents a diverse riding, equally as diverse as Parkdale High Park in Toronto. The provisions that are in place that have not gotten enough attention are ones that facilitate pathways to citizenship. So when we talk about language testing and knowledge testing, we heard an uproar about the previous legislation, about how it created, again, barriers to accessing citizenship. Our position is that you don't need to have a language test applicable to people aged 14 to 17 because they're getting that kind of language training in the school system already. We also heard a great deal from people that were getting ages 55 and older who said language testing can be a significant barrier for people that are otherwise well integrated, well ensconced, and very learned about what takes place in Canada and very knowledgeable about our culture and our political institutions. Those people are served by our immigration settlement agencies, and we also understand that there is no reason for us to put a barrier in place to their citizenship because when you look at the studies, we realize that citizenship helps people feel a sense of permanence and helps overall achieve better overall their integration. Thank you.
In comments, questions et commentaires, the honourable member for Sherwood Park, Fort Saskatchewan.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and I thank my friend, the Parliamentary Secretary, for his remarks, in particular his praise for the electoral system that gave rise to such diversity. I don't doubt the Minister for Democratic Institutions appreciated that as well. He did neglect to mention, by the way, Malta in his list of countries, a grievous omission, certainly. But I want to just ask him specifically about this issue of the intent to reside. Now, he implied, I think, I'm sure not intentionally, but that the intent to reside provision in some way restricted people's mobility rights. He knows, of course, that there was absolutely no restriction of mobility rights. It was clearly about an intent to reside. Canadian citizenship shouldn't be merely transactional. You shouldn't come here to get your citizenship and then leave with absolutely no intent to have a long-term commitment to the country. But there was no restriction on mobility rights. And if he's afraid that this led to fear in some people's minds, perhaps it's because of misinformation about the original provisions, not their substance. So I wonder if he would be willing to clarify that, in fact, there was absolutely nothing about the original provisions that restricted mobility rights.
The honourable parliamentary secretary.
The list of countries that I provided at the outset, I thank my friend opposite for the question. The list of countries that I outlined at the outset was provided to me by the Library of Parliament. I do apologize if there's a member born in Malta in this chamber, perhaps even the member himself, because I've been to Malta. It's a lovely place. There's a lot more churches than there are days of the year. It's very sunny and warm, but I will acknowledge that and add that to the list of now 23 countries, Madam Speaker. In terms of the intent to reside provisions, the problem with the previous legislation is that it changed the application form which people needed to fill out prior to having the ability to take the oath of citizenship. Are mobility rights respected on the Charter? Of course they are. I'm a constitutional litigator, ma'am. I appreciate that. But the intent to reside provision sowed confusion in terms of the requirement at the date of taking the oath, but also going forward whether people were allowed to actually move and leave this country. They are indeed allowed to move. Mobility rights are protected. What we're doing is clarifying that provision, which caused a problem and a barrier rather than a facilitation of citizenship. Thank you.
Resuming debate, reprise de débat, the honourable member for Sherwood Park, Fort Saskatchewan.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. It's a pleasure for me to rise and address this important debate, and certainly an honor for me to follow my friend, the Parliamentary Secretary from Parkdale Hyde Park. I didn't agree with much of what he said in his speech, but I appreciate his work in this place, and particularly the opportunity we have to work together on Canada Parliamentary Friends of Tibet. Now, I want to, before I get into the specific provisions of this bill, I want to spend a little bit of time setting the philosophical groundwork, at least in terms of how I see it, and I think how many on this side of the House see it, what the substance of this debate is underneath these provisions in terms of what Canadian citizenship is all about. And I will say at the outset that I believe that we live in the best country in the world. And I don't say that lightly. I've lived abroad. I've traveled quite a bit. I think for many reasons we live in the best country in the world. And I think one of the proof points of that is the fact that we have so many people who want to come here. Over the last 10 years, we've had the highest sustained immigration levels in this country's history, but comparatively as well, many more people want to come to Canada relative to our population than want to come to many other countries in other parts of the world. So as we think about what our citizenship is, what our citizenship means, perhaps it's important to start by asking why Canada is such a great country and what we can do to ensure that in the context of our ongoing definition and redefinition of citizenship, that we preserve what is essential about our country. Now, we are all very proud of Canadian diversity, and the Parliamentary Secretary spoke, I think, eloquently about the diversity that we have in this country. But many countries around the world have diversity, and perhaps have a different experience of that diversity. I was thinking as I prepared for this about the visit of the Chinese foreign minister. China is a very diverse country, but a country in which religious and ethnic minorities face significant difficulties. Russia is a very diverse country. Syria, in fact, is a very diverse country. So we have many countries around the world that are diverse, where perhaps the experience of that diversity is not positive for those who are in the minority. So it's clear if we look at this comparison that it is not diversity alone that makes us great. It is not diversity alone that makes us who we are. But it is, in fact, what we do with that diversity, how we work together in the context of that diversity. And in particular, I think our ability as a nation to build together around shared values. If you have diversity without any kind of shared values, there is always a risk of conflict. But I'm very proud of our history as a country which has both great diversity and which has managed to maintain a strong sense of shared values. And that's particularly important for our success. And it's worth underlining what some of these shared values are. We have a belief in this country in freedom. We have a belief in democracy, in basic principles of human rights, and to some extent in universal concepts of human dignity that underline those ideas of human rights. We have a belief in the rule of law, in universal human equality and value, regardless of race, religion, caste, ethnicity, linguistic background, etc. We have a belief as well in gender equality, which is very important to who we are in this country. And we have a unity around these common values in the context of our own diversity. And I think our experience of not just political unity, not just sort of general accommodation of each other, but of practical community and common purpose is quite unique in this country. I was in a European capital. I'll just share this anecdote because I think it's important. I was in a European capital a number of years ago, meeting with a friend of mine who was working there, who was a Canadian. And we were in this very diverse part of this city. There were people from all kinds of different parts of the world. But then we noticed around us all of a sudden that we didn't see any mixed race social groups. We saw a group of people from one racial group together and then a group of people from another, and we looked around us in this crowded center of this European capital, and it was a little bit jarring to realize that in spite of the fact that this was a very diverse place, there weren't obvious signs of community, of at least people sitting together within that place. And I think the advantage we have here in Canada is in building substantive community between different people of different backgrounds. And I thought about that experience later when at the time it was, I think, the British Prime Minister and similar comments made by French and German leaders talking about the alleged failure of multiculturalism in the European context. And as much as I would regard that as not correct, even in the context of Europe, it's worth understanding that there was a different experience of multiculturalism in Europe compared to the Canadian experience. Canada, from the moment of its founding, was a country founded on shared values and on ethnic, religious, linguistic diversity. And compare that to many European states, which yes, obviously emphasize elements of shared values, but also have measures of ethnic nationalism built into their foundings as well. Now, we have to welcome newcomers in a way that understands that background, without compromising what George Cartier called our concept of one political nation. And I want to read you a quote from a book called Straight Talk, a book on federalism that I think captures this well. The dual quest for the universal and for cultural diversity has been with us since the birth of our Confederation. We have often strayed from it since then and committed grave mistakes and injustices, but the result is this admirable human achievement that is Canada. We've had this history from the beginning of combining the universal values in the context of diversity. And quoting from the same book, finally, Cartier wanted Canada to be a political nation, a nation of solidarity, which transcends race, religion, history, and geography, to ensure that the French in Quebec would never want to break their solidarity with other Canadians. If we seek a contract at the birth of our federal union, it is certainly the one expressed by Cartier, which has inspired all of Peter Russell's work. Quebecers of all origins have helped other Canadians a great deal to achieve that ideal. They must not renounce it. Now, this book, Straight Talk, was actually written by the Minister of Foreign Affairs. I think he's had some very good things to say in the past, certainly, about the importance of common values in the context of this diversity. But where are we going from here, then? What is the philosophy which underlines this legislation advanced by the government? Well, early in the new government's term, the Prime Minister was talking to the New York Times about aspects of Canadian identity. And here's what he said, something very different than these words that I've just quoted of the Foreign Affairs Minister. The Prime Minister said, "There is no core identity, no mainstream in Canada. Those qualities are what makes us the first post-national state." He said there is no core identity, no mainstream in Canada. Those qualities are what makes us the first post-national state. So we have in this House, at least between our side and the Prime Minister, very different visions of what the Canadian nation is supposed to be. Ours is one of unity around shared values in the context of ethnic, linguistic, religious, and other forms of diversity. But the Prime Minister's concept is one that I think goes beyond or outside of this idea of shared values and emphasizes the diversity, but at the same time wants to perceive Canada as a post-national state, not as a political nation. And it is with that we come to a piece of legislation put forward by this government that allows convicted terrorists to retain their Canadian citizenship. And I think we can understand what their thinking is on this bill in light of the Prime Minister's comments to the New York Times and in light of that underlying philosophy. It's clearly a problem, Mr. Speaker, to our historic concepts of Canada as a political nation to say that convicted terrorists should be able to retain their citizenship, because a terrorist isn't just someone who wants to do violence and mayhem. A terrorist is somebody, in our current conception of it, very much who disconnects themselves from our Canadian values, who embraces a wholly distinct set of values than the ones I've outlined: gender equality, universal human dignity, human rights, democracy, the rule of law, and instead commits themselves to fighting for the destruction of those very values. A terrorist isn't someone who is pushed outside of the fold of Canadian values. A terrorist is someone who chooses to leave the fold of Canadian values. And that's very clear. Our concept of diversity that emphasizes shared values says diversity does not extend to those who wish to destroy us. There have to be parameters or limits ensuring that we remain the country we have always been, a country of, yes, unity in the context of our diversity. I think the Liberals' view of diversity in many ways bends over on itself, because it permits those who are deeply at odds with things the Liberals themselves clearly believe in: gender equality, human rights, the rule of law, democracy, and yet it allows people who reject those things, who want to fight against those things, to remain in the Canadian family and to use the advantages of their membership in the Canadian family, of their Canadian passport, for example, to then wreak havoc against the very values that we espouse. We believe, I think, in all corners of this House, deeply in the idea of diversity, but we believe that diversity is necessarily bounded as a practical matter, as a matter of our own survival. There are certain things that we must agree are simply not welcome here, and they include the desire to destroy our way of life. So I ask Canadians who are watching this, Madam Speaker, to reflect on these differences of vision, the one espoused by the Prime Minister and the one espoused by George Cartier, the question of Canada as a post-national state, or of Canada as having as being part of a common political nation. Now, that said, on that provision, I do think it's important to specifically counter some of the arguments that were made by my friends across the way. Because there were many things that members of the government have said on this that I think are substantially true but don't really apply to this legislation. My friend, the parliamentary secretary, praised the importance of having a path to citizenship. Of course, we have always had a path to citizenship in this country. Nobody is proposing, has seriously ever proposed, the creation of sort of a UAE style of citizenship where you have to be born here. We believe very much in a path to citizenship, and we can disagree about whether, over the difference of 1 year here or there in terms of being in the country, without disagreeing on that fundamental point. And I would say to those who have a commitment to Canada, there isn't a substantial problem with saying, let's wait another year. Those who don't have a commitment to Canada, will perhaps have a different perspective, but all of those who have a commitment to Canada, I think, whether it's an additional year, it's not clear to me what the sort of breaking point is about those changes. Now, this important issue alleged by the government of and we hear this talking point over and over again, of two-tiered citizenship. There are two things that need to be said about this. First of all, the government has been very clear that it is their intention to retain the ability to revoke citizenship that was acquired on the basis of fraud. This means that anyone who acquired their citizenship could have it stripped from them on the basis of fraud. Now, fraud is, in my mind, a much lesser crime than terrorism. And so for the government to say that, on the one hand, citizenship is irrevocable for someone who clearly parts ways with Canadian values, and then say, on the other hand, well, no, you can lose your citizenship if you cheated on a form. There's just not a consistency there, Madam Speaker. So if they really take this idea that citizenship is irrevocable to its logical extreme, it's hard to understand why they would be dealing with the more extreme issue and yet leaving in place the revocation possibility for a relatively less extreme offense. But I want to say this as well about the regime they put in place. Their bill institutes a system of two-tiered citizenship that did not exist before, because under their system, anyone who acquired their Canadian citizenship could have it stripped from them on the basis of fraud. Under our system, anybody could have their citizenship stripped from them on the basis of fraud or involvement in terrorism. Under their citizenship process, nobody who is born in this country or who is born with Canadian citizenship could ever lose their citizenship. Our system treats equally those who were born abroad and those who were born here. So I'm perplexed by the government's continuing use of this talking point, in spite of their total unwillingness to actually implement the fullness of this supposed principle that they're espousing. The fact is, where you are born doesn't matter for our original legislation. You could lose your citizenship if you were involved in terrorism, and it didn't matter if you were born here or if you were born somewhere else. Because the value of Canadian citizenship is dependent on your commitment to our shared values, not on where you were born. And that's an important principle, and that's a principle that we have stood for. Of course, as a practical matter, you cannot strip citizenship from someone who only has one citizenship. And that is true whether or not you obtained your citizenship via fraud or whether you obtained your citizenship in spite of then going on to commit or be involved in some form of terrorism. That's a practical matter, Madam Speaker. And obviously, we are limited in this House by certain features of the practical world in terms of what we can do and what we can do. But as much as possible, we should hold fast to that principle, that Canadian citizenship has value. It expresses the substance of who we are as a country that has unity around shared values in the context of our diversity. And that is something that, unfortunately, is simply not appreciated by the arguments made on behalf of this bill. Now, there are some more clarifications that need to be made about the original system that we had in place. And I think it's a bit perverse, frankly, that members of the government talk about new Canadians being worried about the provisions of this bill because of misinformation about them, and then go on to continually imply things about this bill that are incorrect. If some Canadians were worried about the provisions of the bill and didn't have a proper understanding of what the original bill was doing. I would hope that the members of the government who were maybe talking to these Canadians in the context of their campaign would have provided correct information about the bill. They might have clarified, actually, no, there is no restriction whatsoever in the original C-24 on mobility rights. There is no possibility whatsoever that someone could lose their citizenship for a minor crime. In fact, someone who commits a major crime, a violent crime, still could not have their citizenship revoked, regardless of where they were born, regardless of whether or not they were dual citizen. It is only in the case of terrorism. And I think the crucial point with respect to terrorism is this is where someone has stepped fully outside of the parameters of Canadian values. They've said they have no interest in being part of the Canadian family. They've acted in a way that puts themselves fundamentally at odds with it in terms of their values. Now, one of the arguments we've heard as well from my friends across the way is the assertion that, well, putting them in jail is enough, that someone shouldn't face both imprisonment and then the loss of citizenship. But these are two completely different kinds of sanctions that deal with different kinds of issues. Of course, somebody that's involved in violent crime or terrorism should be punished through incarceration. But there is also the issue of whether or not this person has retained their commitment to be part of the Canadian family or not. And these are different issues that should be both dealt with and certainly both considered. But there's another practical matter that I think the government ignores in their reasoning here. It is the fact that a person could well be outside of the country and become very involved in terrorism, be fighting for Daesh perhaps or another terrorist group. And clearly in the process of their actions and their involvement in that, take themselves outside of the Canadian family. Now that person, as long as they retain their Canadian citizenship, has the benefits of Canadian citizenship, can ask for assistance by diplomatic staff. Canadians would be on the hook to bail that sort of an active terrorist out. And of course, we don't have the ability to incarcerate someone if they're abroad fighting on behalf of another terrorist organization. So this is perhaps a context in which this would have to be considered, and I don't think is properly considered by the government's arguments. And it's important to just underline in that context at the same time that it's not the conviction in a foreign court that would lead to these considerations. It would only be Canadian a decision in Canadian courts or an adjudication on the basis of equivalency, an evaluation that was done based on Canadian law with respect to terrorism that still wouldn't require someone to be in the country. So I think in terms of the underlying philosophy, Canadians should go with George Cartier, not the post-national anti-identity fantasies of the Prime Minister. And it's also important to dig into the real substantive provisions of this bill and realize that this bill does not fix problems that were real, that we were addressing significant problems. Terrorists should not be.
Questions and comments? Questions et commentaires. The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
Mr. Speaker, I thank the honourable member for his comments, for his advocacy in this chamber, for the frequency of his speaking engagements, and for his work on the Parliamentary Friends of Tibet. I raised 2 points in respect of what he has been speaking about. The first point in respect of the European limitations. He identified at the outset of his remarks concepts in Europe versus concepts in Canada. And what I would put to him as the first part of my question is that I agree with that. That the genius of the Canadian model is that not only do we accept people into this country, but we put them on a path to permanence, and that's something that we should be exporting to various countries in Europe as they're struggling with things such as a migrant crisis. But secondly, this concept of citizenship was informed a lot of his comments about different ideological perspectives, different historical perspectives, different citations that he was mentioning. What I would say to him is that, yes, citizenship does have value, and we on this side agree with the member opposite of that notion. The exact value that's being attached seems to be somewhat different because his conception seemed to be that if allowing convicted terrorists to keep their citizenship is somehow anathema to this concept of citizenship and anathema to this concept of the Canadian tradition. And I would wonder, and I would put it to him as a second part of my question, is that if there's some uniformity about this conception that he's articulating, then why the Conservative governments of Diefenbaker, Clark, and Mr. Mulroney ceased to touch this provision of the Citizenship Act when they were in office, because that's clearly not in conformity with his conception that he's articulating.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Well, I'll answer the last part of the question first. Of course, we know that we're dealing in a very different kind of world than was dealt with by those previous prime ministers. We live in the kind of world today where non-state actors are much more influential, and much of the conflict that we engage in involves non-state actors. So there wasn't the same pressing need to deal with individuals who may be Canadian citizens affiliating themselves with non-state armed groups abroad and seeking to inflict violence upon the country. So this I think explains that part of the question. Countries obviously deal with the problems that are in front of them. Now, let me just underline again what my concept of citizenship is all about. It's citizenship rooted in shared values. And it's citizenship with a wide breadth of permissible convictions and values, but also that is at some point bounded. That a person who chooses to fully reject all of the things that are foundational to Canadian values, all of our concepts of human rights, democracy, the rule of law, freedom, gender equality, at that point they choose to separate themselves from our concept of citizenship. And if we don't have some definition or limits on that concept of citizenship, then it's hard to understand what the Prime Minister means when he talks about citizenship. In fact, when he talks about us being a post-national state.
Questions and comments? Questions et commentaires. L'honorable député d'Abitibi-Témiscamingue.
The honourable member for Abitibi-Témiscamingue. Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. I'd like to put a question to my colleague about something that is not in the bill with regard to an amendment brought forward according to which a person found guilty of a crime abroad, which is also a crime in Canada, cannot become a citizen. I believe my colleague knows that there are many justice systems worldwide that are very corrupt, and people found guilty of a criminal charge abroad in some of those corrupt systems are not truly guilty, but have been the victims of a vendetta by the system in a state that is corrupt. So isn't there some danger of not taking into account the context of the charges laid? Is it truly reliable? And thus, preventing someone from becoming a citizen in such circumstances would mean that they were never criminals, but were victims of a corrupt system.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and I thank my colleague for the question. It's not something that's addressed specifically by this bill, but I think it's an important issue. Now, generally in these cases, my understanding is that equivalency assessments can and should be done. Because the member is quite right that someone may be convicted of a crime in another state without having actually committed that crime, that another state may have not only different kinds of offenses, but different kinds of ways of adjudicating offenses that we have in a way that doesn't respect the fundamental rights of the individual. So it is important to have that process of equivalency assessment to assess the validity of convictions or charges that may have happened in other countries. So I think that as much as that's not addressed in the scope of the bill, having that equivalency assessment is important.
Questions and comments? Questions et commentaires. The honourable member for Peace River West Loch.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and I'd like to thank my colleague for his great speech on this particular topic. It's always find him very interesting to listen to, and I got a couple of points that I'd like him to broaden out, perhaps. We've talked a lot about citizenship and values. I was wondering if he could talk a little bit about the value of the idea of citizenship, like the whole concept of why we have citizenship in a country, and maybe on the other side of the value of the Canadian citizenship in particular, and what does having a citizenship status in Canada, what does that look like to somebody that's not from Canada? And if you could also talk a little bit about dual nationals and how that we're one of the few countries in the world that allows for dual national, and that puts us in this particular predicament. So if you could talk to those points, I'd much appreciate that.
The honourable member for Sherwood Park, Fort Saskatchewan.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Great question from my colleague. I don't know if I'll be able to address all of those points. In terms of this issue of the value of Canadian citizenship has incredible value. We work to help people who are in troubled regions of the world who are Canadian citizens get home, and it's right and important that we should do that. Canadian citizens have access to the many benefits of living in this great country, the social services that we provide, the ability to come here, to come and go freely, and to be part of that community. It is important to me, therefore, that Canadian citizenship not be viewed by those who acquire it as a transactional good. It not be viewed purely on the basis of its value, but that it be viewed as something that, in a sense of a deeper value, that it be viewed on the basis of their commitment to the country. Citizenship should not be used, to paraphrase Kant, as merely a means. It should not be a means to an end, but it should be an end or a goal in and of itself, something that expresses a deep value and a deep appreciation for this place. And that's why some of these provisions in the original bill, I think, were important. They were ways of affirming that people were intending to make a meaningful commitment to this country. And by the way, it didn't slow down the path to citizenship. We had in the last year, in 2014, the last full year Conservatives were in government, over 250,000 immigrants become Canadian citizens. So is that not evidence of a successful path to citizenship? Over 250,000 immigrants becoming Canadian citizens. That shows that valuing Canadian citizenship doesn't deter new citizens, it actually encourages them.
Comments, questions et commentaires. The Parliamentary Secretary to the Government.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Speaker. And I would tend to disagree with the member on a couple of points. First and foremost, the Conservative government of the past was no friend to when it came to the whole issue of citizenship and landed immigrants becoming citizens. What I remind the member, because he wasn't here at the time, is that we had seen just huge delays in processing times, where you would have 80% of those putting forward applications having to wait well over 2 years. And for those unfortunate 20% could end up being even that many more years, Madam Speaker. Then you take a look at the expanding of the requirements to become a citizen, Mr. Speaker. Many people had a difficult time, but specifically to the bill and some of the comments that he put on the record. One is the fact that what he is saying, or what the Conservative Party is saying, Madam Speaker, is that, look, if you have a dual citizen and you're a terrorist, you get deported. If you do not have a dual citizen, but you're a Canadian citizen, you would not be deported. And my question to the member is, why does he believe the Conservative Party supported a two-tier citizenship?
The honourable member for Sherwood Park, Fort Saskatchewan, a brief response, please.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I will then briefly just list some numbers that explicitly refute the assertions that the member made, assertions that he made without numbers. During our term in office, 1.6 million immigrants became Canadian citizens. I'm proud of that record. In 2014, 262,625 immigrants became Canadian citizens, more than ever before in Canadian history. Now, if you in fact compare the average number of immigrants who became citizens, it was 180,395. That was the average over our term in office, beating out the Liberal average previously of 168,806. Those are some numbers. So if the member wants to make assertions about Canada's performance under the previous government, he should actually back it up with facts, which he did not do.
Resuming debate, reprise de débat. The honourable member for Vancouver Kingsway.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. It gives me a great pleasure to stand and speak on behalf of the New Democratic Party on this important piece of legislation. Now, during the 41st Parliament, the previous Conservative government brought in a bill called C-24 that made a number of changes to the Citizenship Act. The most controversial of those changes, I think Canadians are well aware of, was a change that effectively created two classes of citizens. One in which naturalized Canadians, or Canadians that were born abroad but became a Canadian citizen here, were treated differently than a Canadian citizen who was born in Canada. I think the Prime Minister expressed it quite eloquently when, during the campaign, he talked about a Canadian being a Canadian being a Canadian. And I think that resonated with Canadians as well. But there's many other parts of that bill that also were seriously flawed and problematic. Many experts pointed out that the bill was in a number of ways unconstitutional and or did not respect international law. From a political point of view, the bill was ill-conceived. It was conducted in haste. In many ways, proposed changes to the law where there had been no problem that had been demonstrated. It was a repeated attribute of the previous Conservative government to make decisions not based on evidence but based on ideology, and this C-24 was a classic example of that. The bill turned out to be very unfair, divisive, it was ideologically driven, and most importantly, Madam Speaker, it was unfair. Now, the NDP opposed Bill C-24 from the very beginning, and we called for it to be withdrawn and amended, proposed dozens and dozens of amendments, all of which were rejected by the Conservative government. So this bill before us today, Bill C-6, would amend that flawed and very, very damaging piece of legislation. So the New Democrats are very happy to support this bill at third reading. Now, Bill C-6 amends Bill C-24 in a number of ways, but not in all the ways that we think it ought to be amended. So I'll cover both of those. I'll start with where it does amend C-24 in a positive fashion. This bill removes the ability to revoke citizenship based on certain specified grounds. It removes the obligation for a new citizen to declare the intent to reside in Canada. It restores the length of time a permanent resident must actually be present in Canada to qualify for citizenship. It restores it back to the 3-year period over 5 years from the desire of the previous government to expand that to be permanent resident in Canada for 4 years out of 6 years. This bill restores the right to count up to 2 years of temporary residence before one becomes a permanent resident towards the amount of days that someone has to be resident in Canada to qualify for citizenship. It eliminates the requirement that an applicant must have been present in Canada for 183 days in 4 out of the last 6 years, and it removes the requirement for the language and knowledge examinations, which the Conservatives broadened to apply to young people aged 14 to 17 and seniors aged 55 to 64. And I'll expand on that. Bill C-6 also adds to Bill C-24 by preventing offenders from counting time served for conditional sentences, that's a sentence served in the community with conditions, towards the calculation of required presence in Canada. That was actually a very large gap in the bill that the Conservatives missed. And Bill C-6 also gives citizenship officials the power to seize fraudulent documents, which is another important provision that would allow our administrators of our citizenship to be able to do their job. Now, this bill, as I said, is not perfect, and we would like to see additional changes. Bill C-6 does not address certain provisions of Bill C-24 regarding, one, the power of that bill granted to the minister to revoke citizenship based on a paper review with no judicial hearing. It does not address provisions in Bill C-24 that provided a prohibition on citizenship for people charged with or serving a sentence for a criminal offence abroad, which also has to be an indictable offence in Canada. And this bill also leaves the minister's discretion to privately grant citizenship to individuals, which is another power that the New Democrats do not believe ought to be exercised in such an executive and non-transparent manner. So, the New Democrats are pleased to support this bill because it repeals many of the harmful and unconstitutional changes to citizenship made by the previous government. We are disappointed again that this bill does not go quite far enough in the ways that I've just mentioned. And we also point out that the narrow scope of this bill did prevent many amendments recommended by expert witnesses, including the Canadian Bar Association, from being admissible at the committee stage. Now, the Minister of Citizenship has explicitly acknowledged this and suggested that the Liberal government will need to introduce another immigration bill in the fall to address those shortcomings. We want to encourage the Minister to keep his word on that, and we look forward to working with the Minister as he tables a truly comprehensive bill that will improve the Canadian citizenship process and comprehensively restore proper, sound, and fair law to this very vital part of Canadian political life, citizenship. Now, I'm going to talk a little bit about the background to this bill. It was introduced by the Conservative government in February 2014, so essentially within a year and a half of the last election. The reason I point that out, Madam Speaker, is that the previous Conservative government tended to act on ideological and wedge political reasons, not on sound evidentiary base, and we think that this bill was motivated politically as they tried to speak to a base and an intolerance in Canadians by creating wedges between people, and I'll talk about that in a few moments because we think it's a very unsound way, always an unsound way to create legislation in this place. At second reading in the last Parliament, the NDP tabled a broad amendment calling on the government to withdraw that bill, and we also asked the government to send that bill to committee before completing second reading to allow that bill's obvious flaws to be addressed before continuing debate. Surprisingly, the Conservatives refused, and despite our opposition, they adopted Bill C-24 without amendment. So Bill C-24 received royal assent in June of 2014. Since then, the New Democrats have been asking for the bill to be revoked, especially regarding the provisions that increase the powers in the hands of the minister, including the authority to grant or revoke citizenship in executive fashion without a judicial process, to eliminate the recognition of time spent in Canada as a non-permanent resident, the parts of the bill that prohibit the granting of citizenship to persons who have been charged outside Canada with an offence, and that increase the residency requirements and the knowledge and language requirements of that bill. Once again, the Liberals have addressed most, but not all of those issues in this new bill. Now, I'm going to drill into some of these important issues. First, let's examine the provision that we support in this bill about repealing the national interest grounds for citizenship revocation. Legislative changes of that former bill that came into effect created a new ground of citizenship revocation that allowed citizenship to be taken away from dual citizens for certain acts against what was described as the national interest of Canada. These grounds included convictions for terrorism, treason, spying offences, or for membership in an armed force or organized armed group engaged in armed conflict with Canada. Now, this bill repeals those grounds. Now, I want to say at the outset that the New Democrats, and I think every member in this House, acknowledges the seriousness and unacceptability of those crimes. There is no question about that. Treason, terrorism, spying, acting in a foreign army engaged in conflict with Canada are all crimes that I think every Canadian would condemn in the most strenuous ways possible. However, the issue becomes what the proper remedy for that is. What the New Democrats, and I think many members and obviously the Liberal government have now acknowledged in this bill, is that the proper response to anybody who commits those acts is to be dealt with harshly and appropriately by the Canadian legal system. That is the proper way to deal with citizens, not to strip a citizen of their citizenship rights. It's funny, it harkens back to the old medieval concept of a king in the 12th century banishing a citizen from the kingdom as their punishment. That's the kind of spirit that infused the Conservative government with this law, when instead any person who believes in modern democracy and modern concepts of statecraft would agree that once you become a citizen, you are a citizen. And citizens should be dealt with together. Now, here's the rub. For the Conservative government that I've heard them say the word equality in this House before, have never been able to satisfactorily explain to anybody how if a Canadian citizen born in Canada committed a terrorist act, or a Canadian citizen born in Canada spied against Canada, or a Canadian citizen born in Canada fought for an armed forces against the Armed Forces of Canada, they would not be stripped of their citizenship. But a naturalized Canadian who commits exactly the same act could be stripped of their citizenship. That was the essence of the objection to that provision, is that it created two tiers of Canadian citizenship. And as much as Canadians, and I will stand in this House and all MPs will stand here and condemn each one of those heinous crimes, we will equally stand in this place and say it's a Canadian value to treat Canadian citizens equally before the law. So I'm very happy to see the Liberal government enforce that very important concept. I want to talk about repealing the intent to reside provision. So since June 2015, adult applicants must declare on their citizenship application, because of the Conservatives' law, that they intend to continue to reside in Canada if granted citizenship. Now, this provision created concern among some new Canadians who feared that their citizenship could be revoked in the future if they moved outside of Canada. Now, the Liberal government is proposing to repeal this provision, and I congratulate them on that because it's absolutely the right move. All Canadians are free to move outside of this country and live where they wish. And again, we have another example of discrimination in law by the Conservative government, where I, who was born in this country, could go move to France if I wanted to and never have to worry about my citizenship being revoked. But someone who lives in a different country, who is natural or was born in a different country, who's naturalized here, would have to worry. That's discriminatory, Madam Speaker, and I'm glad to see the government repeal that discriminatory provision.
The member will have about 7.5 minutes the next time that this matter comes before the House. Private members' business. It being 1:30, the House will now proceed to the consideration of private members' business as listed on today's order paper.
Private members' business. Resuming debate at second reading of Bill C-224, Good Samaritan Drug Overdose Act, standing in the name of Mr. McKinnon, Coquitlam, Port Coquitlam.
This is just Charlotte-Wood. Member for Charlotte-Wood, St. James, Assiniboia, Heading-Whitley has 6.5 minutes remaining from his speech from the previous debate.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I'm proud to once again rise in strong support of Bill C-224, the Good Samaritan Drug Overdose Act. I would like to thank the member from Coquitlam, Port Coquitlam, for bringing up this vital piece of legislation. Now is the time to help our fellow Canadians in need. Drawing on my 20 years of experience as an emergency physician, I can say with confidence that if passed, Bill C-224 will save lives. During my clinical experience, I have witnessed and treated many overdose victims in the poverty-stricken downtown core of Winnipeg. Emergency room doctors, nurses, and first responders are better able to help people when they know what the victims have ingested into their systems. Finding out what someone has ingested is vital when determining what you can do to help them. The findings on physical examination are often too variable to yield any useful information, and laboratory tests can often take too long to be of benefit. I often have to ask these patients, or those who accompany them, what substances they have taken. Typically, they are reluctant to provide this information. However, once I explain that there is no risk of prosecution due to patient and physician confidentiality, they give me the honest answers, and I am able to provide better care. Doctor and patient confidentiality should be extended to the individuals that accompany the victims, and fear of the law should not prevent someone from potentially saving a life. As physicians, nurses, first responders, and as a society, we all have a duty to care for the most vulnerable in our communities. I believe this bill will help our vulnerable population be less afraid to ask for the help they need for their friends and themselves. Some may argue that people who routinely ingest harmful drugs are responsible for their outcome, and what happens to them is their choice. I disagree. It is almost unanimously accepted by the medical profession that addiction is an illness. Furthermore, it is not widely understood by the public that addiction is highly correlated with underlying mental illness. Someone with an undiagnosed or poorly controlled mental illness may take harmful substances in an attempt to self-medicate. This bill is vital to helping these vulnerable individuals. Critics of this bill might claim that by preventing legal sanctions against drug users, this bill facilitates and encourages drug use, as is claimed with other forms of harm reduction. On this point, the evidence is also clear. Harm reduction saves lives, improves outcomes, increases access to rehabilitation, and does not increase either the use of drugs or incidents of crime. This is the conclusion of the Canadian Medical Association, the Centres for Disease Control, and the World Health Organization. While we have made steps in other areas of harm reduction, Canada lags behind other jurisdictions on this issue. In the United States, over 30 states and the District of Columbia have some form of Good Samaritan overdose immunity law. In 2014, the House Standing Committee on Health recommended considering Good Samaritan overdose legislation in the future. This recommendation has yet to be implemented. What are we waiting for? When looking at this bill, you should consider the evidence. A Waterloo Region Crime Prevention Council study found that less than half respondents would call 911 in an overdose situation, citing potential charges as a major barrier. A study of Washington State, which passed Good Samaritan overdose legislation in 2010, found that almost 90% of respondents aware of the law would make the call. When considering this legislation, it is important to recognize that these people are our sons, daughters, friends, and family members. A young person at a house party may be too scared to call for help for their overdosing friend if they fear charges. Too often, we have seen this story in the news, how fear caused delay, and there should not be a need for hesitation or a second thought when calling to save a life. If this bill is passed, a scared young person at a house party will be more likely to call 911 if their friend is in trouble. A bystander will be more likely to put compassion and conscience before fear and self-interest. I expect this legislation will receive very wide support in the House, with very little opposition. In fact, if anyone is considering opposing this bill, I urge them to please talk to a recovering addict or an emergency room doctor or a victim's family. Members should ask these persons with direct experience if they think this bill could save lives, and then they should vote their conscience. Evidence-based legislation should appeal to our hearts as much as it appeals to our logic. We need a law that responds to the rising fatalities associated with opioid use. With these rising fatalities, it is now more important to act. The future victims of an overdose cannot wait any longer. The sooner this legislation is put in place and is implemented, the more vulnerable Canadians could be saved because someone made the right decision to make the call to save a life. In closing, we are dealing with an ongoing and escalating tragedy. Madam Speaker, let us wait no longer. The time is right to pass Bill C-224. As the member for Coquitlam, Port Coquitlam has said, there is no time for saving lives like the present. Let's pass Bill C-224. Let's save lives.
Resuming debate, reprise de débat, the honourable member for Kamloops Thompson Caribou.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and I would like to thank the member for Coquitlam, Port Coquitlam, in putting forward what I believe is a very important piece of legislation, 224. It's not all of us that are fortunate to have such an early spot, and to have a bill that's going to make a, potentially a life-saving difference, I think is truly a privilege, and I do thank him for it. I think perhaps coming from British Columbia, I'd like to put a little bit of perspective around what the issue is that he's trying to address. And in the province where I'm from and where he is from also, between 2010 and 2015, there was a 50% increase in deaths due to drug overdose. In 2016, we have seen a really worrisome spike. There has been 201 deaths in 3 months in British Columbia. And indeed, the situation is so serious that the public health has declared a state of emergency. So this is really, again, something that is a big issue in British Columbia, but also across Canada. And sometimes you think it's an issue that's perhaps, in sort of our larger centres, in some of the places like the downtown east side, that is not accurate for a minute. I look in Kamloops alone, there has been 13 fatalities in Kamloops in 3 months from a drug overdose, and we had 6 that happened in one day. So you can just imagine. 4 of them managed to get treated and are fine. And these aren't just numbers and facts. These are people. These are our friends, our daughters, our children. In Kamloops, there's 3 families that have spoken out very directly, wanting to raise awareness, especially regarding the issue of fentanyl and the tragic consequences there. Ryan Pinio's family spoke out very publicly. Their son was an athlete. He, of course, had a very supportive family. He struggled with addictions and, of course, succumbed to a tragic overdose. Another young man from Kamloops area, his name was Lance Ritchie, and his parents also spoke out. And the reason they're speaking out again is to raise awareness in terms of the incredible danger that's out there. Lance Ritchie, he loved the outdoors. He loved to fish. They have beautiful pictures of him that they showed the people of Kamloops in terms of, this was our son. Yes, he did something that was wrong. He did something that was perhaps foolish, but he was, a wonderful man. 24-year-old Ben Cohen, another one whose family is grieving, and it's so tragic to see the mothers and the fathers talk about their children. Someone that I knew from a very young age, I think it was a fairly high-profile tragedy in North Vancouver where Hardy and Amelia, young parents, again, a foolish decision, no question, but good people who made a very, very bad mistake. So what will this particular act mean? The research that the proponent of the bill shared was that sometimes there is a barrier for getting help quickly, and that barrier is because the people that are with their friends or their classmates or their mothers or fathers, they're worried. They're worried that there's going to be some consequences in terms of the substances. So the research is very clear that at times there has been a barrier because of possession, and I guess we also just heard from the doctor across the aisle around, he in his own experience found that the barrier, people were concerned in terms of whether it was self-interest or whether, for many reasons in terms of getting help quickly. In the case of opioids, what does getting help quickly actually mean? I'm a nurse by background, and I can remember in the hospital, this was a legitimate use of a narcotic for pain control, and we had given a woman some pain medications post-surgical, and it was just a couple of minutes later, I happened to go into the room, and she had stopped breathing. She had stopped breathing in reaction to an allergic reaction to the pain medication. In the hospital, you had something called Narcan, naloxone, and she had an intravenous going, and it was absolutely stunning to see someone that was on the brink of death who had stopped breathing. We injected the naloxone into her, the Narcan as we knew it by at that time, and she started breathing again. She opened her eyes, and she was kind of, what happened? For someone that has never seen what can happen with the Narcan that makes it so sort of reverses the effects. So not only having someone being able to call, so this is sort of a multi-issue. This is one piece of the puzzle that our colleague has introduced is, getting people help quickly and removing barriers for people to seek help. Really important piece of the puzzle. In British Columbia, they had this take-home naloxone program, and that was to make it readily available. What they had done, and actually Health Canada did work through, is rapidly going through a process to say, let's make naloxone available, not by prescription. And really, Madam Speaker, if it's kind of people, if they have a bee allergy, You often will see the kits and you learn how to do an injection in terms of reversing the effects of the allergy to the bees. This particular injection can be easily learned in terms of administration and truly is life-saving. I think the other important feature is that, you know, lay people can learn how to deliver naloxone. It is absolutely life-saving, and there's very minimal adverse effects. And I did note also some people sort of say, well, we perhaps should be criticizing this because we are, endorsing drug use. That is not actually what's happening. It's been very, very clear what's happening is life-saving, whether it's someone that's suffering from an addiction that has taken an overdose. It is absolutely life-saving, whether it's a young person who's been at a party who's made perhaps a foolish decision. Again, life-saving measures. So I think if you put this particular bill into the context of what is a dramatically escalating situation in British Columbia and across Canada, and provide some basic tools, life-saving tools, then we have a good bill. And I too will suggest and hope that all members in this House will support this bill. And again, even if it saves one life, it is a bill well done. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Resuming debate, reprise de débat, the honourable member for Regina Louvain.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. We will be supporting this bill to provide an exemption from drug possession charges when someone calls 911 to report an overdose. It is a simple, common sense, proven policy that will save lives. I thank the member for Coquitlam, Port Coquitlam, for bringing this bill forward. We know all too well how desperately our communities need action to end this crisis. As the member for Kamloops, Thompson, Caribou mentioned, British Columbia's health officer has declared a public health emergency. This is the first time that such emergency powers have been used. The province took this step because in the first 3 months of this year, there have been more than 200 deaths from overdoses of fentanyl. At that rate, we could see 700 to 800 British Columbians dead by the end of this year. We are talking about an opiate that is exponentially more powerful than morphine or heroin. We have seen provincial task forces created and police alerts issued in major cities across Canada. We know that this problem won't go away on its own. Indeed, it could get much worse. Recently, police in Edmonton seized a shipment of white powder from China before it could be prepared for street sale. Lab testing revealed it to be a substance called W18, a synthetic opiate that is almost unimaginably deadly, 100 times more powerful than fentanyl and 10,000 times more potent than morphine. To put that in perspective, the amount seized recently in Edmonton, 4 kilograms, is, according to public health officials, enough to kill every person in Alberta 45 times over. And yet, this drug is so new that it has not yet been included in the Controlled Drugs and Substances Act. So it's clear, the face of such a complex crisis, that many things need to be done, and done quickly. But this bill is one essential step, and we must take it without delay. One study cited by the Pivot Legal Society suggested that most people who witness an overdose do not call 911. Fear of arrest for drug possession is one barrier among many, but it's one that we have the power to lift. This is a step that many jurisdictions have already taken. In the United States, New Mexico was the first to pass a Good Samaritan law in 2007. 31 states followed suit. By all accounts, these laws have been successful in reducing the fear of police involvement as a barrier to calling emergency assistance during an overdose. We need to do more as well to ensure that drugs that counteract opiate overdoses are more readily available where they're needed. Naloxone was delisted by Health Canada on March 22nd. This followed the unanimous recommendation of 130 community groups, health experts, and other groups. But this still leaves it up to the provinces to ensure broader access. In BC, naloxone is now available without a prescription and is in the hands of almost all EMS personnel. In Alberta, more than 500 pharmacies are offering free kits without prescriptions. But access is not as open in some other provinces, where it is still available only to trained responders or through a doctor's prescription to friends and family of opiate users. Furthermore, costs and access in rural areas still present barriers to saving lives from overdoses. There remains a federal role to play in encouraging access to easier forms of dosage, for instance, replacing injection with a nasal spray. Of course, we must also do more to prevent overdoses by increasing awareness about fentanyl-laced street drugs and by reducing its availability by tackling illegal production. On the former, I note, for example, the recent initiative by Toronto Public Health to create a simple website, reportbaddrugsto.ca, to allow fast, anonymous reports of tainted street drugs so that warnings can be spread immediately to opiate users through community agencies. On the latter, I note the recent introduction in the Senate of Bill S-225 by Senator Vernon White. This bill would add the ingredients of fentanyl to the schedule of controlled precursors in the Controlled Drugs and Substances Act. And, together with the provinces, we must do more to control the use of highly addictive prescription opiates. These initiatives must be considered as elements of a broader response by all levels of government to a crisis that is overwhelming too many communities. This bill deserves to be praised in the context of removing the ideological blinders of the previous Conservative government and instead adopting the evidence and public health-based approach to drug policy for which New Democrats have long been proud advocates. I would salute here the work of Libby Davies, the former member for Vancouver East, who has been a powerful advocate for harm reduction, public health, and safer communities for many years. If we are to make this long overdue paradigm shift real, it will take much more from this government. We will need to see the government's promise to repeal Bill C-2 honored and to support supervised consumption sites. We need to see a review of criminal justice laws, including mandatory minimum sentences in the Controlled Drugs and Substances Act. That, as we saw in the Supreme Court just days ago, may not only be costly and ineffective, but also unconstitutional. I know I speak for many communities when I say that this is not an issue that we can afford to leave on the back burner. In communities across Canada, overdoses are an epidemic, and we need action now. Just last week, the CBC printed an interview with a Winnipeg opiate user named Amanda. She reached out to reporters after a close friend died of an overdose. She said, quote, "I have 15 contacts in my cell phone, and 2 of them died in 3 days. That's scary enough. That says it all," end quote. There are many things we can do to help Amanda and the thousands of Canadians struggling with addictions, and to renew and strengthen the health and safety of communities they call home. But this is one step we can take now, and I believe we should do it without delay.
Resuming debate, the reprise de débat, the Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Leader in the House of Commons.
Yes, thank you, Madam Speaker, and I'll keep my comments short. But first, if I may, just to address the member's concern in regards to the W18, which we know is a very much a powerful drug that has caused a great deal of damage to society. And in listening to the member, I can assure the member that the Government of Canada has in fact acted very quickly on it. It is in fact now on the illegal substance list, and in essence that means, for example, Madam Speaker, it is illegal in Canada for production, possession, importation, exportation, trafficking, all of that is now illegal for the W18 drug, Madam Speaker, and we see that as a good thing, showing that the government can respond to incidences of this nature. But I wanted just to stand up very briefly to actually compliment our colleague from Port Coquitlam, Port Coquitlam, for the efforts that he has put in to providing us Bill C-224 today. It should be acknowledged that this particular member, and through his efforts, will in fact directly be saving lives if in fact we pass, as I believe there seems to be a will of the House to virtually give it potentially unanimous support, Mr. Speaker. And I think that speaks volumes in terms of here we have a member that has recognized just how important the Good Samaritan bill on drug overdose is to not only the community in which he represents, but the community as a whole. I did get the chance to listen to the member or to go over the comments that the member had provided and listen to the two examples, both of young people, one in Ontario, one in Saskatchewan. I think these types of stories of overdose and someone dies, quite frankly, unnecessarily, what could be unnecessarily, is very sad and tragic situations, and it happens today in a very real and tangible way. So I think that it's with pleasure that I rise and indicate not only my support, but from the government's perspective, support of this particular private member's bill, Madam Speaker, in hopes that we will see ultimately unanimous support. Thank you very much for the opportunity to say a few words.
The honourable member for Coquitlam, Port Coquitlam.
Madam Speaker, it is an honour to rise at the end of this debate to acknowledge and thank the many members from both sides of this House who have risen in support of this bill, C-224, the Good Samaritan Drug Overdose Act, many of whom have shared with us their personal, powerful stories about why this bill is so important. This support has resonated not only on a multi-partisan basis throughout this House, but throughout Canada as well, from coast to coast to coast. We have, for instance, received strong expressions of support for the Ministers of Health in several provinces. In BC, we have support from the BC Chief Coroner and the BC Public Health Officer, as many have noted already, who has just recently declared a public health emergency due to the surge in overdose deaths, a dramatic increase that has in fact echoed across the whole country. In my own Tri-Cities community as well, a great many of our local public officials have stepped up, from the mayors of each of the Tri-Cities, school board trustees, and a large number of city councillors. Indeed, Port Coquitlam City Council passed a unanimous resolution of support. We have heard from police, firefighters, and paramedics as well. For first responders know that they can only save lives if they actually get the call. We have heard from religious leaders and ordinary citizens, as well as, throughout the country, families of victims who might have lived if only someone had picked up the phone and made that call a little earlier. By providing limited immunity from simple possession charges, we remove a significant barrier to making that call. This means more lives will be saved. More people will live to have a chance to make better choices. In my opening speech, I spoke of Austin Paterick and Kelly Best. Two young men who tragically died too young, where they might have lived if someone had made that call earlier. Austin and Kelly are just two of the all too many unfortunate victims throughout this land who on a daily basis needlessly die because someone was afraid to call for help. Austin and Kelly, let these names stand now on behalf of all those victims through all the years, but better yet, let them stand as well for all those that we might yet save in the years to come by passing this bill. Madam Speaker, this bill will not end the scourge of drug overdoses, and we will not end the intolerable toll of death, but surely we can stem the rising tide. We will not slay this dragon in this one fell blow, but we can bring it to its knees. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Is the House ready for the question? The question is as follows. Mr. McKinnon, seconded by Ms. Kwan, moved that Bill C-224, an act to amend the Controlled Drugs and Substances Act, be now read a second time and referred to the Standing Committee on Health. Plaît-il à la Chambre d'adopter cette...
Is it the pleasure of the House to adopt the motion?
Carried. Accordingly, the bill stands referred to the Standing Committee on Health. It being 2 o'clock, this House stands adjourned until next Monday at 11 a.m. pursuant to Standing Order 24-1.
Thank you.